Chapter 22:17 The truth of the otherworldly demonic tribe. Having seen through Zhongxian's intention, the black phoenix in the sky advised, "Master, you'll require the strength of a god monarch at least if you wish to head over to stop them. Without that much, you won't be able to do anything." "You're right. I need to grow stronger in order to have a greater say in matters. Otherwise, I might not even be able to meet them at all," Zhongxian said grimly. There had to be a compelling reason behind why Kong Shi and Luo Ruoxin had made such a decision, so it was unlikely that his words would somehow be able to magically convince them out of it. If he wanted to make a difference, he needed to have the strength to make it happen. But alas, his rate of cultivation was still too slow. He had been in the firmament for a month now, but his soul cultivation had only reached God-King realm pinnacle thus far. If he could become a god monarch on par with Kong Shi within the next 5 days, would he be able to stop the battle? But Zhongxian knew that this was impossible. He had not even comprehended a god-king realm cultivation technique yet, so it was clearly impossible for him to make so many breakthroughs within such a short period of time. Zhongxian felt a deep sense of helplessness weighing down on him. "Master, it's indeed nigh impossible for your cultivation to reach the level of a god monarch within the next few days. However, you still have little Deathless here with you," the Black Phoenix said shyly. Zhongxian's eyes immediately lit up as a spark of hope appeared right before his eyes. Indeed, it was practically impossible for him to become a god monarch within the next 5 days, but he could help Little Chick recover its strength as the Deathless Monarch. Even if its strength was beneath that of Kong Shi and Luo Ruoxin, at the very least, it felt like he would be able to do something with a god monarch on his side. 40 years ago, when I was defeated at my peak, Spirit Origin Royal City ended up collapsing inward, resulting in the deep abyss that we see beneath the floating city today. If we can find the collapsed city and retrieve my powers from it, it shouldn't be too difficult for me to recover my memories and return to my peak, the Deathless Monarch said. Zhongxian trembled upon hearing those words. It just so happened that he knew where that collapsed city was, the Azure City of Collapsed Space. As long as they could find a way to get there, they would be able to retrieve Little Chick's powers and allow it to return back to its peak. But there was a problem. There was a dimension barrier between the Azure and the firmament, so how could they descend to the Azure? "You are a god monarch, so you should at least know a thing or two about how god monarch Lingxi was able to descend to the lower worlds, right?" Zhongxian asked the Black Phoenix. "I don't really know the details. My will is quite weak at the moment, so I spend most of my time sleeping. However, not too long ago, God Monarch Lingxi paid me a visit and borrowed my seal of Supreme Monarch, which is an insignia representing my identity as the spirit god," the Black Phoenix replied. "Seal of Supreme Monarch?" Zhongxian frowned. As it would turn out, it seemed to be something similar to how the royal seal worked in his previous world. Whenever the god monarch passed down their edict, they would use their seal of Supreme Monarch as their insignia. In other words, it was a token that represented their unparalleled authority. "The person who holds my seal of Supreme Monarch will be able to represent me, the spirit god, and the sky of spirit origin," the Black Phoenix said. "This?" Zhongxian's eyes widened in realization. "Could it be that Ruoxin borrowed your seal of Supreme Monarch in order to relay an edict to the people of Spirit Origin Royal City who are currently living in the Azure and the Master Teacher continent? That's how she was able to have them conduct a ritual to open up the dimension barriers for her descent." He recalled a past conversation with Du Qingyuan, and the latter had mentioned that they had not heard anything from the spirit god for the past several thousand years. It was only some time ago that the spirit god suddenly contacted her and instructed her to hold a ritual to allow her to descend to the lower worlds. It did not sound like a big deal when he first heard about it, but that was only because he did not know just how resilient the dimension barrier of the firmament was. One must know that even god monarchs were not able to breach the dimension barrier. This was probably the only loophole that one could exploit in order to get to the lower worlds. That would also explain why Luo Ruoxin was known as the spirit god on the Master Teacher continent and the Azure. At the same time, this verified his conjecture about the otherworldly demons being the people of Spirit Origin Royal City that had fallen from the firmament. It was likely that their bodies were tainted by the impure spiritual energy of the lower worlds, causing their cultivation to regress and their nature to become warped. Going through the chain of events once more, 40 years ago, Disaster struck Spirit Origin Royal City, causing it to fall to the azure and become known as the City of Collapsed Space. A portion of the semi-divinities that had fallen along with the city survived and founded Starchaser Palace. Meanwhile, a number of the survivors fell into the cracks of space and ended up on the Master-Teacher continent as otherworldly demons. This was why Starchaser Palace and the otherworldly demonic tribe shared similar altars, and they possessed the exceptional ability to communicate across worlds. That would also explain why Little Chick, despite being the resurrected form of a god monarch, had ended up in the Master-Teacher continent. Most likely, Kongsha had found it in the otherworldly demonic tribe and sealed it in the vicinity of the Sanctum of Sages. In the end, Luo Chichi had ended up finding it through a map and told Luo Shenqing about it. 40 years ago on the firmament, 4,000 years ago on the firmament, and 40,000 years ago on the Master-Teacher continent. The timeline fit. Most likely, the key to breaking the dimension barrier was the spirit god's seal of Supreme Monarch. With such a thought in mind, Zhongxian turned to the Black Phoenix and asked, "Where is your seal of Supreme Monarch?" Did Ruoxin? No, I mean, did God Monarch Lingxi return it after using it? It's with me now. She returned it shortly after using it. The Black Phoenix opened his beak wide, and a token roughly the size of a round plate flew out of his mouth. As the round plate revolved quietly in the air, Zhongxian felt as if all the energy within the sky of Spirit Origin was swaying along with its movements. If the conferred god kings governed over the territories within the sky of Spirit Origin, this seal effectively granted one authority over the entire sky. This included not just the land but the sky as well. "Can you lend it to me?" Zhongxian asked. "Of course. Everything that little Deathless has is yours, Master," the Black Phoenix replied with a fawning smile. With a flap of his grand wings, the seal immediately flew into Zhongxian's palm. Taking a closer look at the seal, Zhongxian's body trembled in agitation. He could see countless inscriptions carved on top of the round seal. These inscriptions were a miniature version of what he had seen on the altars of the otherworldly demonic tribe. Previously, he could not really understand what these inscriptions meant, but after spending some time in the firmament, he had become rather familiar with the geography of the 9 skies. As such, he was able to tell that these inscriptions were actually the landscape and constellation map of the sky of Spirit Origin. The seal was created based on a fusion of those two. All this while, the rituals of the otherworldly demonic tribe were not directed at any specific individual but the sky of Spirit Origin itself. Had he not seen the map of the sky of Spirit Origin before, he would not have been able to figure out all of this. "Let me give it a try and see if I can use it to communicate with the azure." Taking in a deep breath, Zhongxian drove his energy toward the seal of Supreme Monarch. Wang! A brilliant light escaped from the seal, a sign that it had been activated. Seeing this, Zhongxian began speaking in an obscure language. It was the same language that Du Qingyuan used for her rituals. He had learned it back in his time on the Master-Teacher continent and the azure. "That's the God Monarch's deathless celestial phoenix language," the fire feather conferred God King said grimly. Other people might not be able to comprehend this language, but as a conferred God King, one of the strongest existences of the sky of Spirit Origin, he could tell what it was. It was the deathless celestial phoenix language of their God Monarch, and its reputation in the firmament was equivalent to that of the 8 notes of Heavenly Dragon. Chapter 22:18 Descending into the Abyss, the seal released a buzz for a moment before the light gradually dimmed. Seeing this, Zhongxian frowned. Based on his theory, he should have been able to communicate with Du Qingyuan and the others through the altar via this ritual, but for some reason, he was unable to reach them. It felt like there was something hindering him, preventing him from delivering his message. If that was the case, how did Luo Ruoxin communicate with them? Would it easier if we head to that distorted space from before? Little Chick, who had been silent all this while, suddenly proposed. It had been with Zhongxian through the azure, so it was able to tell what Zhongxian was planning to do. The distorted space. Zhongxian repeated before nodding excitedly in agreement. Indeed. If his previous conjecture was correct, the abyss beneath Spirit Origin Royal City should be linked to the azure. Even if there was still a dimension barrier there, it should be much thinner compared to elsewhere. Perhaps this was how Luo Ruoxin was able to successfully descend to the Azure and enter the Master-Teacher continent. Let's head there to take a look, Zhongxian said. Little Chick nodded as it spat out the stone phoenix sculpture that it had swallowed earlier. Without any hesitation, the black phoenix immediately entered the sculpture once more. It was already in a feeble state due to its earlier exertion, and it looked like it would not be able to last too long. Seeing how even the will of the old deathless monarch had acknowledged Zhongxian as his master, the fire feather conferred God King and the others did not dare utter a word of objection. They bowed deferentially to send Zhongxian off. Descending from Spirit Origin Royal City, Zhongxian was just about to enter the abyss when he was suddenly joined by Luo Chichi. "Bring me with you," she said with a determined gaze. Understanding Luo Chichi's intentions, Zhongxian nodded in agreement. If they descended to the Azure, Luo Chichi would be able to return to the Master-Teacher continent and meet Luo Shenqing and her other family members. This was one of her greatest regrets all this while, so it would be good if she could resolve it. The two humans and a chick quickly descended the passageway of the abyss, and about an hour later, they were finally standing before the spatial vortex. "I'll be heading down first." With the previous experience, Little Chick unhesitatingly dived into it. "I'll give it a try, too," Luo Chichi added with a chuckle. Before her body even fell into the spatial vortex, the space around her had begun warping to mimic the movements of the spatial vortex. As a result, she was able to maneuver freely within the spatial vortex without sustaining any injuries. As the spirit of the Dimension Silencer, she was extremely sensitive to the manipulation of spatial laws. Furthermore, her cultivation had already reached God King Realm Pinnacle. With that, it was not too difficult for her to pull off this feat. "I guess I'm the only one left," Zhongxian muttered as he took a deep breath. Unlike the last time he was there with Feng Zhouge, his soul cultivation had already reached God King Realm Pinnacle, and he had the Spirit God's seal of Supreme Monarch in his possession. It should not be too dangerous for him to enter the spatial vortex. Thus, he channeled his soul energy to form a massive barrier around him before leaping into the spatial vortex while clutching the seal of Supreme Monarch tightly. Wang. As soon as his body touched the spatial vortex, he began to twist as if he was a noodle. Despite having straightened his body, he could still see his feet warping like a reflection in a distortion mirror. He was unable to control his body. Luo Chichi swam over to his side and said, "The space within a spatial vortex is actually not too different from normal space. Don't believe what you are seeing through your own eyes. Don't believe what I'm seeing through my own eyes. Our eyes and senses perceive what we see and sense in normal space to be right because it is what we are accustomed to. So, in an area of distorted space, we must view the world from a distorted perspective in order for it to make sense to us." Luo Chichi explained the unique properties within the spatial vortex to him. As the spirit of the Dimension Silencer, she was able to grasp the secrets of the spatial vortex shortly after entering it. After hearing Luo Chichi's words, Zhongxian quickly adjusted his point of view, and he could finally perceive the world in the same way that he was used to. Seeing that Zhongxian was finally adapting to it, Luo Chichi gestured forward and said, "The spatial vortex is not the same throughout. The degree of distortion can change very quickly as we move from place to place, such that even conferred God Kings will have trouble trying to venture too deep." Looking in the direction that Luo Chichi was gesturing toward, Zhongxian saw the world ahead of him distorting in countless bizarre ways. There were some areas that were incredibly broad and some areas that were almost as thin as a needle. It was as if the laws of the world had suddenly collapsed within this area. To make matters worse, the space was flowing non-stop, such that what he saw a moment ago could become drastically different a few breaths later. With such vast changes in the spatial laws, even the conferred God Kings would face grave danger in there. It was not to say that conferred God Kings were not strong enough, but the laws that governed this spatial vortex were very different from those of the firmament. Their conferred powers would not work in this area, so they could only wield the strength of a God King in there. That would mean that they would not be any stronger than Zhongxian and Luo Chichi. The two humans and the chick advanced through the spatial vortex for roughly 2 hours, but in order to adapt to the distorted space, they actually only managed to advance 500 meters within this period of time. The spatial vortex ahead of them stretched on, and it could possibly be hundreds and thousands of li. If they were only able to cover 500 meters within 2 hours, how long would it take for them to get to the end of it? Most likely, they would still be wandering around there even after Luo Ruoxin and Kongsha had finished their duel. This isn't working, Zhong Xian said with a deep frown. He had been trying to use the seal of Supreme Monarch all this while, but he still was not able to establish a connection with the Azure. The dimension barrier was still too strong. I'll lead the way. Follow closely behind me and make sure that you don't lag behind, Luo Chichi said. Zhong Xian was surprised. He was just about to ask what she was going to do when she suddenly morphed into the round form of the dimension silencer. She released an aura that caused the distorted space to freeze, as if someone was forcefully holding it in place. Let's go, Luo Chichi exclaimed. Zhong Xian and Little Chick quickly followed her and darted ahead. With the dimension silencer stabilizing the space, they were able to progress swiftly ahead. 4 hours later, after covering tens of thousands of li, a dark gray screen appeared before them. Swirls of gray currents rippled on the surface of the screen, and they emanated a pressure that made it difficult for one to breathe. Who? Luo Chichi reverted to her human form as she gasped desperately for air. Her face was pale from overexerting herself. It was clear that the earlier flight had depleted her energy greatly. Zhong Xian quickly passed a pinnacle god essence pill to her so that she could replenish her energy. Roughly an hour later, her face finally regained its glow once more. Something is really weird about these gray currents of energy, Luo Chichi remarked as she examined the sight before her contemplatively. It is weird. Zhong Xian nodded in agreement. The gray currents of energy were what Feng Zhouge had absorbed into his body previously. He had thought that there were just little traces of it around the abyss, but who could have known that they would form a massive wall further in? Luo Chichi moved toward the gray wall and reached toward it. Seeing her action, Zhong Xian immediately exclaimed with a horrified face, "Don't do." However, before he could finish his words, the young lady had already gotten afflicted with the gray energy. With its ability to devour energy, Luo Chichi's cultivation swiftly fell from God King Realm Pinnacle all the way to God King Realm Primary Stage within a few breaths, and it was continuing to fall further. Chapter 22:19 God King 1 Don't use your zhenqi to fend off the gray energy. After the experience with Feng Zhouge, Zhong Xian knew that the gray energy had the ability to devour the zhenqi within one's body. He quickly rushed over to Luo Chichi's side and placed his palm behind her back. Not even the Heaven's Path zhenqi was able to stop the gray energy, let alone other zhenqi. The more a cultivator tried to use their zhenqi to fend off the gray energy, the faster they would deplete their zhenqi. Channeling the pathos of Heaven zhenqi into Luo Chichi's body and circulating it through her meridians, Zhong Xian was able to quickly seal off the gray energy that had seeped into her body earlier. After that, he had Luo Chichi quickly swallow some medicine to recover her vitality. At the same time, he quickly drove the Heaven's Path divine art to create some Heaven's Path zhenqi to infuse into the young lady's body. The clash between the Heaven's Path zhenqi and the gray energy produced a brilliant green light. It took a while, but the gray energy was eventually fully neutralized. That allowed Luo Chichi to slowly recover her cultivation, but her face remained pale with fright. For a moment there, she had thought that she was going to die. If not for Zhong Xian's swift reaction, she had a feeling that the gray energy would have corroded her soul. She might even have turned into an otherworldly demon just like the semi-divinities of Spirit Origin Royal City. Back then, Feng Zhouge had been afflicted with it while he was still a distance away from the distorted space, and that had caused him to suffer for 2 years straight before being kicked out of his clan. This time, the grey swirls of energy rippling across the wall were at least 1,000 times more concentrated, making it a far more frightening force. Don't cultivate or absorb anything here. It'll be extremely difficult to deal with if the grey energy seeps into your body, Zhong Xian instructed. Luo Chichi and Little Chick quickly nodded. After the previous encounter, they came to realize just how frightening the grey energy was. Even with the Little Chick's regenerative prowess, it would still be unable to deal with it properly once it was afflicted with the strange energy. The pathos of Heaven zhenqi is unaffected by the grey energy, so I might just be able to fend off the grey energy with it. From the looks of it, it seemed like all energies that were beneath the level of the firmament's heavens would be unable to ward off the grey energy. However, his pathos of heaven Junshi had already surpassed the level of the heavens, which was likely the reason that the grey energy was unable to phase it upon contact. Most likely, they would have to rely on his Junshi in order to overcome this obstacle. To test out this theory, Zhongxian wreathed his arm in his pathos of heaven Junshi and slowly placed it on the grey wall. The grey energy swirling in the area was pushed away, and his arm remained completely unharmed. It does work. Zhongxian exhaled deeply. With a smile of relief, he turned to Luo Chichi and Little Chick and said, "Stay close to me. We'll be traveling past the grey wall right now." Luo Chichi and Little Chick moved over to his side, and he quickly covered them with his pathos of heaven Junshi. Then, they began making their way into the grey wall together. TZZZZZZZZ. The grey energy swirls within the wall relentlessly threw themselves against the three intruders, and the furious hissing of corrosion echoed all around them. Yet, they were unable to breach the protective sphere formed by the pathos of heaven Junshi. After taking a few steps, Zhongxian glanced backward to check on Luo Chichi and Little Chick's statuses, and it seemed like they were doing fine. So, he continued ahead. But less than a minute later, he halted and started to retreat backward. "What's wrong?" Luo Chichi asked. After leaving the grey wall, Zhongxian released the protective sphere of energy around the three of them and gasped for air. In just 3 short minutes, he had expended all of his pathos of heaven Junshi. While the grey energy was unable to phase the pathos of heaven Junshi, there were simply too many swirls around. This put a huge strain on Zhongxian, causing his Junshi to deplete swiftly. The key problem was that he had not been able to restore the amount of Junshi he had back to its maximum capacity all this while. In his current state, it would be difficult for them to pass through this region. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian sat down and cultivated for roughly an hour before he finally restored his Junshi. "I need to find a way to fill up my dantian once more. If I could raise my Junshi cultivation to the God King realm, that would be even better." Zhongxian rubbed his glabella in distress. His dantian had originally been filled with an ocean of Junshi, but it had all dissipated as green light after clashing with the grey energy, causing it to become completely empty. If he wished to pass through the grey wall, he would have to either increase the amount of Junshi within his dantian or find a way to continuously replenish his Junshi so that he would not run out of it. Otherwise, if he ran out of Junshi halfway through, they would be doomed. The only problem was that he had only received 3 Pinnacle God Essence pills from Fu Jiangchen, and he had given the last one to Luo Chichi. Furthermore, even if he had the luxury of having an unlimited number of Pinnacle God Essence pills to squander, it was unlikely that he would be able to restore his Junshi fast enough to match his rate of depletion. "If it comes down to it, I should just eat the Pill King." Currently, the most potent pill he had with him was the Pill King. It was a treasure that could move even a conferred God King. He would certainly be able to replenish the Junshi in his dantian by consuming it, and there was a good chance that he could push for a breakthrough to the God King realm as well. The only issue was that he still had not comprehended a God King realm cultivation technique yet. The Pill King was his trump card for making a breakthrough, and it would be a huge waste to use such an invaluable pill just to replenish his Junshi. For the pathos of heaven, I have already comprehended the ties between a subordinate and a master, the camaraderie between brothers, and the relationship between a teacher and a student. If my gut feeling is not off, the next realm probably should be the sentiments of a parent. Zhongxian sat on the ground and began thinking it through. He had been an orphan in his previous life, and he did not have anyone around him that could be considered a parental figure. In his current life, he was privileged to have found his parents, but the time he had spent with them was very short. His inability to fully comprehend familial ties made him unsure about how he should carry on, and he had ended up putting it off again and again. But he could not do that anymore. No matter what, he had to give it a go. Closing his eyes, he began to think about all the time he had spent together with the Xingmeng Sword Saints. In order to find him, his parents had gone through a lot. Even as the whole world told them time and time again that he was already dead, they had persevered for the sake of the slim chance that he might still be out there in the world. For him, they were willing to cast aside their lives. The sentiments that they carried for him were nobler than anything in the world. But, while Zhongxian could understand all of that rationally, he was unable to connect to those feelings emotionally. Sitting quietly on the ground, he tried his best to stand in their shoes and grasp their feelings, but the willful emotions simply would not obey human will. Sighing deeply, he raised his head to look at Luo Chichi and asked, "Say, what do you think are the feelings that a parent would feel toward their child?" Luo Chichi was taken aback by Zhongxian's abrupt question. Her face reddened a little as she replied, "I can't really tell either. I guess only those who have a child can understand those feelings." Emotions were experiences, not explanations. The two of them were only in their 20s, and they had not had their own children yet. Without being in that position themselves, they would not be able to comprehend such sentiments. Seeing that Luo Chichi had misunderstood him, Zhongxian scratched his head awkwardly. He was just about to explain the reason behind his question when Little Chick suddenly tucked its head beneath its small fluffy wings and said, "Isn't it easy enough if you want to have a child? There's no one else here anyway. You are a man, she is a woman, and all of your physical functions are working perfectly fine. Just make one here. Don't worry, I'll cover my eyes and not peek." Zhongxian's lips twitched. He knew that he should have fried this darned chick back then. Zhongxian quickly turned to look at Luo Chichi, only to see that her face had turned so red that it looked as if it was going to burst. Zhongxian sighed deeply and said, "I'm not messing with you. I am asking this question so that I can make a breakthrough to God King and get us through the Grey Wall." "What do you mean by that? Does it look like I'm joking around? How can you understand the feelings of a parent without having a child?" Little Chick replied indignantly, "Since the both of you are here, why don't you just make one? Once you have a child, you'll surely come to have a deep understanding of the sentiments that come with being a parent." Seeing how this fellow was still shamelessly spouting bullsh** tea, Zhongxian kicked him flying before harumphing. "Can't you talk properly? Even if they really did it then, they would still need 10 months of pregnancy and years of raising the child before they could truly comprehend the feelings of a parent. But they did not have that much time to spare. Chapter 22:20 God King 2 Hey, I'm talking properly, too. If you are worried that there isn't enough time or you don't want the commitments that come along with it, you can do it in a dream. You will be able to make as many babies as you want right away as long as you create the right environment," Little Chick replied. The god monarchs had the ability to create transient dreams through formations. That kind of formation would place an individual within a dreamscape where time was accelerated. It would only take a few hours for one to live an entire lifetime within the dream. Hearing this, Zhongxian fell into deep thought. To be frank, it was a plausible solution. It was a dream anyway, so it should not count as anything. But he was only 20 years old. If he lived a lifetime in a dream at such an age, he would be a completely different person by the time he returned. He would have lost his youthful spirit and his hot-bloodedness. Furthermore, once he had a wife and a child in a dream, regardless of whether it was a dream or not, it would be unfair to Luo Ruoxin. So, he shook his head and asked once more, "Do you have any other ideas in mind?" TSK Little Chick clicked its tongue in annoyance before replying. "How troublesome. Well, you might not have any children, but you do have quite a lot of disciples. As they say, a day as a teacher, a lifetime as a father. Your sentiments for them can probably rival those of their parents, so it might work if you can comprehend it from such a perspective. It really could not stand that blockhead of a master. He has such a beautiful young lady who's devoted to him, but he simply refuses to grasp the opportunity. It serves him right to be single. Humph. Ah, wait a moment, I'm also a single chick. At least this darned fellow has someone who likes him, but I don't even have a chicken or duck that is into me." Little Chick sank to the ground in depression. Meanwhile, Zhongxian's thoughts were triggered into action after hearing those words. A day as a teacher, a lifetime as a father. He was unable to comprehend the feelings of a parent because he was without a child, but there was no denying that he cared and doted on his students quite a lot. He was willing to do anything just so that they could lead a better life, and he would not hesitate to stand up for them if anyone dared take advantage of them. Despite that, there was not a single moment when he thought that he was sacrificing himself for their sake. On the contrary, As long as they were doing well, he felt fulfilled and content. Were these the feelings that parents had toward their children? As Zhongxian thought of this, the smiles of the Xingmeng sword saints surfaced in his mind. There were many times when they had stood in front of him to protect him from danger, even when they were weaker than him. Nothing could shake their conviction to keep him safe, and they would do anything for his sake. Those were the sentiments of a parent, the deepest and noblest love in the world. The act of humbly supporting their child, not expecting anything in return. Thread in the hand of a compassionate mother, clothes on a wanderlust son. Just before his departure she sewed closely, in her mind worrying about his late return. How could the inch-high grass ever repay the nourishing sunshine of spring? An emotion rippled through Zhongxian's heart as his zhenqi began circulating throughout his body along with his words. At the same time, sword qi began to form and revolve around his body, slicing through the distorting space. He is comprehending his cultivation technique and sword art together. Little Chick remarked in bewilderment. Having followed its master for quite some time now, it knew that its master would usually comprehend his cultivation technique first before figuring out the corresponding sword art. Yet, he was actually comprehending both together this time. The wind batters unceasingly on the unwilling tree, a son seeks to be filial, but time slips through his fingers. His sword qi was filled with both indignation and melancholic longing. In his previous life, his parents had died prematurely, so he had never been able to meet them before. In this lifetime, he had been so wrapped up by everything around him that the time he spent together with parents was miserably limited. He could not fully understand what it was like to be a son, but he could imagine his parents' worry for him. It would be similar to how he felt for his students. His 11 students were divided across the 9 skies, and it would be a lie if he said that he was not worried about them. By taking on such a perspective, he could see just how worried and conflicted they must feel about him. They did not wish to tie down their child and limit his future, but at the same time, they could not bear to see him braving so many dangers. This was the contradictory feeling of a parent, the sentiments they felt for their children, who, without any hesitation, Zhongxian took out the pill king and swallowed it. Rich medicinal energy flooded his body. Through circulating the medicinal energy around his body, he refined it into pathos of heaven zhenqi and deposited it into his dantian. The pill king contained the purest medicinal energy contained within the grass of god kings, harnessing almost as much power as a real god king. His dantian, which had emptied out due to the depletion of his heaven's path zhenqi, filled up at an incredible pace. Catcher. As his dantian was filled up, he finally overcame the bottleneck in his zhenqi cultivation and rose to the level of a god king. Zhongxian's aura surged like a majestic dragon rising from the seas, transforming into something deeper and stronger. Some time later, the fluctuations of his energy finally came to a halt. Zhongxian exhaled deeply before rising to his feet. He had successfully reached the God King realm, but he was only at primary stage. He had simply depleted too much energy before, and the pathos of heaven's requirement on the purity of the spiritual energy was also too steep. If he wanted to reach God King realm pinnacle, he would need at least several pills on the level of the Pill King. The fact that the Pill King was able to fill his massive dantian and allow him to raise his cultivation to the God King realm was evidence of its rich medicinal energy. I should keep the 3 remaining God King breakthrough pill for my parents and son Qiong, Zhongxian thought with a smile. It would indeed raise his cultivation if he swallowed them, but the effects would not be too apparent. It might not even be enough for him to reach God King realm intermediate stage. They would be put to better use with his parents and son Qiong. Zhongxian examined the changes in his body as a result of his breakthrough, and he found that his zhenqi had become even purer. At the same time, his zhenqi capacity had also increased considerably. He would not have to worry about running out of zhenqi quickly anymore. Let's go. Knowing that there was no need to worry anymore after making a breakthrough, Zhongxian took out the God King sword and swung it lightly. It swiftly generated several surges of sword qi that warped around their bodies to form a protective barrier. This was the God King realm sword art that he had comprehended from the pathos of heaven, filial piety. The sword art contained the emotions of regret and longing. So what if his cultivation was high? So what if he was rich? It was easy to put his parents in second place in his list of priorities in order to pursue all else, but it would be too late by the time he finally wanted to accompany them. This was simply how humans were. They always put off things that they should be doing until it was too late, and they blamed themselves regretfully for not cherishing what they had. Who? Little Chick and Luo Chichi entered the barrier of sword chi as well, and the three of them began venturing through the grey wall. The grey currents of energy ahead of them were sliced apart by Zhongxian's sword intent, allowing them to venture forward without any issues. They had to travel for almost an hour before they were finally out of the grey wall. It was also at this point that they came to a halt. They had come to the end of the road, and there was nowhere else to advance to. The space ahead of them was utterly sealed. "Let me see if I can reach the azure from here," Zhongxian said as he took out the seal of Supreme Monarch. He infused his consciousness into it, and the inscriptions carved on the seal swiftly lit up. Energy quickly surged through the entire seal. "It's working," Zhongxian exclaimed in delight. He could already sense Du Qingyuan answering from the azure. "Have Du Qingyuan conduct a ritual for my descent." Without any hesitation, Zhongxian immediately sent a set of instructions over to the other side. "Azure, here I come." Chapter 22-21 Returning to the Azure, it did not take long for a peculiar force to emanate from the seal of Supreme Monarch. It felt reminiscent of a guiding beacon that led one to one's destination. "I see. In between the firmament and the azure lies an area of chaotic space that prevents one from traveling from one side to the other. The ritual serves not to teleport a person from one side to another but to provide specific coordinates so that one won't lose one's way." Zhongxian nodded in realization. He had thought that the ritual would allow them to teleport straight to the azure, but it seemed like he was overthinking it. Teleportation between worlds was a highly difficult feat that even the spirit god seal of Supreme Monarch was incapable of pulling off. "But even if I have the coordinates, can I really just travel there like that? What about the dimension barrier?" Zhongxian was bewildered. With a contemplative look on his face, he walked over to the sealed space ahead of him. Channeling all his zhenqi into the God King sword, he tried to slice an opening in the sealed space. "Fs." To his surprise, even though it took him a great deal of effort, he managed to make a small opening in the sealed space. He quickly beckoned for Luo Chichi and Little Chick to slip through opening with him. "I thought that it would be impossible to break the dimension barrier, but maybe the key is to not teleport through it and to breach it physically. This seems similar to how it is easier to pass through the dimension barrier when you are ascending to a higher world as compared to when you are descending to a lower world. This could be the design of nature to avoid an imbalance of the world." Beyond the sealed space was a chaotic space filled with spatial turbulence. The spatial turbulence struck relentlessly on the barrier that Zhongxian had created around them, swiftly whittling it down. Zhongxian could feel the zhenqi in his body depleting swiftly. He tried to quickly head in the direction of the coordinates signaled by the seal of Supreme Monarch, but he realized that he was hardly able to move. Chaotic space was reminiscent of a spatial vortex, but it was in an even more disorderly state. The space in the area was all flowing in different directions, making it difficult for even a god monarch to travel in a straight path. If not for Zhongxian's superior zhenqi, their bodies and souls would have been torn into shreds as soon as they entered the area, let alone venturing through it. "I have been through this place before," Luo Chichi said. "Tell me the location, and I'll bring you there." "All right." Knowing that Luo Chichi's powers over space far surpassed his, Zhongxian quickly described the coordinates that the seal of Supreme Monarch was pointing toward. Nodding, Luo Chichi took a step forward and morphed back into the dimension silencer. "Who?" She froze the chaotic space and swiftly advanced forth. "I really wonder what tier the dimension silencer is as an artifact," Zhongxian thought curiously as he looked at the steady passageway that was crafted through the abilities of the dimension silencer. Be it a spatial vortex or chaotic space, as long as it was something related to the spatial laws, the dimension silencer would be able to handle it easily. This was a feat that not all god monarchs were necessarily capable of pulling off. He could not help but wonder about Luo Chichi's origin. It was no wonder she had risen all the way to God King Realm Pinnacle within a month after arriving in the firmament, and she had hardly met any bottlenecks in her cultivation. He had really made the right choice bringing her along. Otherwise, even with his God-King realm sword art, filial piety, it would have been difficult for him to pass through the spatial vortex and chaotic space to arrive at the Azure. Traveling through monotonous surroundings, it was hard for Zhongxian and the others to discern the passing of time accurately. They simply flew on until Luo Chichi finally came to a halt. She morphed back into her human form before gesturing forward. "We have arrived." Zhongxian realized that the coordinates he was receiving from the Seal of Supreme Monarch were just right ahead of him. "Let's head in," Zhongxian said. He was just about to head right in when he suddenly realized that the entire world had started shaking violently due to his attempted entry. It looked as if it would really shatter if he forced his way in. The space in the Azure is simply too weak. It's similar to a thin layer of ice above the winter river. It might be able to handle the weight of a child, but it'll succumb as soon as an adult tries to step on it, Luo Chichi said. "Our powers as God Kings far surpass what the heavens of the Azure can withstand. If we force our way through, we might cause the heavens to shatter and the entire world to collapse." Zhongxian nodded. "You're right. It seems like we'll have to lower our cultivation accordingly." When he first became a god, he had also sensed the heavens of the Azure rejecting his presence. As a god king, he was tens of thousands of times stronger than before, so naturally, his presence would be even harder for the heavens of the Azure to withstand. So, he took a deep breath and reined in his zhenqi within his dantian. Catcher, catcher. His cultivation began to plummet. In just a few moments, his cultivation had already fallen to the level of a semi-divinity. Other than his zhenqi cultivation, he also made sure to suppress his physical prowess and soul cultivation as well. So, other than his comprehension of cultivation having reached the level of a god king, he appeared to be nothing more than a semi-divinity. Even a god monarch would not be able to see through his disguise. Luo Chichi quickly did the same. She sealed her powers using her spatial abilities, causing her cultivation to fall all the way to that of a semi-divinity. As for little Chick, it hesitated for a moment before saying, "I think you should just pass my gourd over to me." Zhongxian had been holding on to the shells of the gourd that it had been sealed in ever since it hatched. "All right then." Receiving the gourd, little Chick slipped into it and reverted to its form as the Dongshu gourd. This act effectively sealed off its cultivation as well. After everything was prepared and ready to go, the two humans and a gourd quickly made their way over to where the coordinate was. TZZZ. An overwhelming spatial pressure crushed down on them, and innumerable heavenly lightning bolts surrounded them. Even though they had tried their best to lower their cultivation, it seemed like the heavens of the Azure had still identified them as intruders and were trying their best to resist them. Under the relentless offense, the three of them ended up sustaining quite some damage before they were able to overcome the lightning tribulation to enter the Azure. It was then that they found Du Qingyuan and Wu Chen standing above a vast ocean with pale faces. Not too far away from them, an altar was releasing a light glow. Looking around, they were at the vacant sea, where Luo Ruoxin had descended the previous time. Back then, she had entered grievously wounded, causing her blood to scatter into the ocean and soak the stones around the area. Only at this moment did he finally realize why even a god monarch like Luo Ruoxin would sustain such severe damage entering the Azure. In order to avoid the heavens of the Azure from shattering, she could only lower her cultivation, and that made it difficult for her to overcome the lightning tribulation that came from entering the Azure as an intruder. Paying respects to young master. Paying respects to sect leader Zhong, Du Qingyuan and Wu Chen bowed deeply. The news they had received was that the spirit god was going to descend among them, so they did not expect to meet Zhongxian instead. When did he become the spirit god? Let's head to Starchaser Palace first. Without any hesitation, he tore apart the fabric of space and traversed straight to Starchaser Palace. Even though his cultivation was only at semi-divinity, through his deeper comprehension of space and more refined control over his zhenqi, he was still able to tear open and traverse through space. After arriving at Starchaser Palace, Zhongxian took a swift look around and found that there were far more pseudo-immortals, true immortals, and high immortals. He nodded in approval at this sight. It seems like the Azure has been developing swiftly. Over the past 10 years, We have had 30 cultivators reaching the semi-divinity realm and over 200 cultivators reaching the high immortal realm. As for the other realms, their numbers are even higher, Du Qingyuan replied with a smile. It had only been slightly more than a month in the firmament, but 10 years had passed for the azure. 10 years was usually insignificant in comparison to the long lifespan that cultivators enjoyed, but due to Zhongxian defeating Kongsha's clone, the resources that had been hoarded by the ethereal hall were reorganized and distributed among the 6 sects. On top of that, the Hall of Gods was no longer guarded by any powers. As such, the number of semidivinities and high immortals increased swiftly within this period of time. The absolute number of experts that had appeared over the past decade was more than the number of experts that the azure had produced for the 4,000 years prior. Nodding in response, Zhongxian extended his spiritual perception toward Starchaser Palace, and a moment later, he widened his eyes in astonishment. Is that Yu Fei and Hu Yaoyao? A pair of familiar figures appeared within his perception, and they were none other than Yu Fei and Hu Yaoyao from the Master-Teacher continent. Chapter 22 Old Acquaintances. The two of them were standing atop a towering cliff, and their light red robes fluttered along with the wind. Who? All of a sudden, the two of them moved simultaneously. Flitting from one point to another with incredible nimbleness, they traded heavy blows with one another. Luo Chichi moved over to Zhongxian's side, and it did not take her too long to notice the two ladies as well. Her eyes lit up in excitement as she exclaimed, "It's Yu Fei and Hu Yaoyao." Yu Fei had been her closest friend ever since their time on the Master-Teacher continent, but when she left for the firmament, Luo Chichi had never expected to see her ever again. She never would have thought that the other party would ascend to the azure, and on top of that, both Yu Fei and Hu Yaoyao had become semi-divinities. Yes, they are sparring with one another, Du Qingyuan said. The two of them are very hardworking. They've spent practically every single day over the past decade cultivating, and it's due to their diligence that they've been able to grow so much stronger within such a short period. There was no cultivator in the world who could rise to the top without working hard. Even for someone like Zhongxian, he had still put a great deal of time and effort into cultivating in order to get to where he currently was. After sparring for a moment, the two red-robed ladies finally concluded the duel and rested by the side of the cliff. Their beautiful faces were marred with a hint of dejection. Don't bother wasting your effort. Without the aura of divinity, we won't be able to overcome our bottleneck and ascend to the firmament, someone said. Following that, a 30-year-old man leaped to the top of the cliff as well. Luo Shenqing. The current Luo Shenqing had also reached the semi-divinity realm, and he was no weaker than the two ladies. I know, but is there really no way? Yu Fei clenched her fists tightly in indignation. That's why I said that we should just forcefully barge our way through. It might be dangerous, but at least there's still a sliver of hope. If we just continue waiting here, it'll really be an eternal farewell, Luo Shenqing said. Eternal farewell. Yu Fei muttered in desolation. The gap between the azure and firmament was unlike that between the azure and the Master-Teacher continent, which one could cross with a little bit of effort. Furthermore, even if they successfully reached the firmament, there was no saying whether they could endure the 100 times increase in spatial pressure. I don't know the cultivation realms in the firmament, but those who are in that world are all the most talented cultivators and geniuses of the myriad worlds. Despite so, we don't see any cultivators from the firmament here, which only goes to show how difficult it is to breach the dimension barrier from the firmament. No matter how talented my younger sister or Zhongsha are, they will need at least hundreds or even 1,000 years to reach that level, Luo Shenqing said. And 100 years in the firmament is already equivalent to 10,000 years in the azure. We will have long passed away by then. Even semi-divinities were only able to live for 1,000 years in the azure. Any longer than that would really be pushing the limits. The darned difference in time meant that their paths would never cross ever again. By the time those who had gone up to the firmament were strong enough to head down to meet them, they would have already turned to ash. I understand as much as well, Yu Fei said with a conflicted expression, but why are you hesitating? Luo Shenqing exclaimed. We are in the same position as one another, and you and I both know that it's impossible to advance any further than semi-divinity realm pinnacle. The only choice we have is to forcefully attempt to enter the firmament. No matter how dangerous it is, we have to give it a try. Yu Fei was quiet for a long while before nodding slightly. Let's do it then. Fei, Palace Master Du has told us that we have to reach the level of the gods in order to enter the firmament, or else we'll face certain death. Hu Yarrow interjected with a frown. Ever since the three of them reached semi-divinity realm pinnacle, their cultivation had simply refused to advance any further. They had tried everything that they could, but soon, they realized that they would not be able to take the final step forward without the aura of divinity. If they could not become gods, they would not be able to enter the firmament. This was the paradox that chained down all cultivators in the Azure, preventing them from reaching greater heights. I missed him once back then. If I can't even follow him now, I don't see much point in living any further, Yu Fei muttered with gritted teeth. If she had chosen the same footsteps as Zhao Ya and the others, she might have been in the firmament right now. She would not have been left there, working in futility for a possibility that was just so far away. Even meeting that fellow once more seemed nothing more than a dream. Since you two have made up your minds, I'll join you. I must say that the horrible fellow has a bizarre charm that really draws people in, Hu Yarrow said with a smile. Back then, Zhongxian had been far weaker than her in terms of cultivation. She could still remember how she had tried to tease the young man back then, only to have the tables turned on her. She had been so infuriated, but thinking about it brought a smile to her lips. There had never been a deep tie between the two of them, but for some reason, she could remember her every encounter with him extremely clearly. It was as if he was deeply imprinted in her mind, and she simply could not shake free of him no matter what she did. If it had been in the past, she could not have imagined that she would go so far for someone. Since we have come to a decision, let's choose a day and get to it. Seeing how he had finally managed to convince these two, Luo Shenqing heaved a sigh of relief. All of a sudden, someone stepped onto the peak of the mountain. It was none other than Wu Chen. Someone asked me to pass this to you, he said as he threw 3 jade bottles to them. For us. Luo Shenqing asked doubtfully as he caught the jade bottle, only to nearly drop it due to its sheer weight. The jade bottle was far heavier than he had expected. He was a semi-divinity realm pinnacle cultivator, one of the strongest experts of an Azure, and yet, he had nearly failed to catch a bottle. This was more than enough to show that there was something special about the jade bottle. With a perplexed look on his face, Luo Shenqing uncorked the bottle and looked at its contents. Lying quietly within the bottle was a droplet of blood. A droplet of blood can actually weigh that much. Wait a moment, is this the blood droplet of a god? Luo Shenqing narrowed his eyes in bewilderment. It would make perfect sense if the droplet of blood within the jade bottle belonged to a god. Infused with great amount of vitality and power, the blood of a god was far heavier than that of ordinary cultivators. This was known within the upper echelons of the Azure. The blood droplet contains the aura of divinity. We'll be able to rise to the levels of the gods right after consuming it, Luo Shenqing remarked as his body began trembling in agitation. Yu Fei and Hu Yarrow were also taken aback by this abrupt gift, and they swiftly came to a realization. Only a god could possibly gift them the droplet of a god, which meant that. Yu Fei immediately turned to Wu Chen and asked anxiously, "This is his blood, isn't it? Where is he?" She could sense it. Her intuition was telling her that it was so. The blood droplet within the jade bottle belonged to that man whom she was looking for. "He has already left," Wu Chen replied. "He instructed me to relay this message to you. See you in the firmament. See you in the firmament." The three of them shuddered. That meant that he had descended to the Azure from the firmament. They had thought that it would be impossible for them to meet each other again after hearing that they had already ascended to the firmament, but who could have known that their paths would cross like that? In just 10 short years, no, it would only be a single month in the firmament, they had grown strong enough to breach the dimension barrier and travel back to the Azure. "Shenqing, this is a gift that a person told me to relay to you. He also left a message for you," Wu Chen said as he passed an object over. Perplexed, Luo Shenqing took the object from Wu Chen's hand, and with just a look at it, his body immediately jolted in astonishment. "This is Chichi's possession." Where is she? The object that he had just been given was nothing more than a cheap, light blue hair clip. It was a gift that he had prepared for his little sister back when they were younger. Holding the hair clip tightly, Luo Shenqing asked anxiously, "What did she say?" "He said that he has already accomplished what you entrusted to him, and if you wish to see him or your little sister, you should quickly make a breakthrough and head over to the firmament." Wu Chen said. "The firmament, is it? Ha ha ha. Very well, let's meet one another in the firmament. He seems to have grown a little stronger over the past month, but I'll catch up to him soon enough. When we finally meet again, I'll make sure to punch all of the teeth out of his mouth." Luo Shenqing burst into hearty laughter as his eyes reddened a little. "We'll be meeting each other very soon." Yu Feier and Hu Yarou glanced at one another before lowering their gazes to the jade bottles in their hands. Clutching onto them tightly, the excitement and anticipation on their faces could hardly be concealed. "Just you wait, Zhongxian, we are coming right after you." While he was unable to find the black skeleton, Little Chick, as the deathless monarch, might just have a way to sense him. "Have you ever seen anyone looking for their own grave?" The gourd shook its bottom lazily. Fine, I'll find it then," Zhongxian said in exasperation. With a flick of his wrist, he took out the seal of Supreme Monarch. The black skeleton might have had the ability to hide from him previously, but if he summoned it through the seal, the other party should have nowhere to hide. Wang. As soon as the seal of Supreme Monarch appeared, a series of spatial ripples immediately appeared around them. The next moment, they were already standing before a grand hall. Standing at the entrance of the hall was a skeleton, who, upon seeing the item floating in front of Zhongxian, hurriedly fell to its knees. "The space in here is much more stable than out there. The heavens should be unable to perceive this area, so you can come out now," Zhongxian said as he patted the gourd. The previous time that he was there, he could not help but notice that this area was isolated from the rest of the world. Even after becoming a god, he was still unable to find this place. It was for this reason that he was confident that Little Chick would not come under the tribulation of the heavens even if it showed itself there. "Catcher." Upon hearing those words, Little Chick finally broke free from the gourd, allowing its god-king realm prowess to flow freely from it. "Your sovereignty, you are finally awake." The black skeleton cried in delight. Overwhelmed with agitation, the black skeleton also revealed his strength. It was at this moment that Zhongxian realized that the other party was actually a god-king just like him. It was no wonder he had been unable to sense the depth of the other party's cultivation the previous time he was there. There had really been on two completely different levels back then. "I wish to recover my strength," Little Chick said. It had not recovered its memories yet, so it was unable to tell whom the black skeleton before it was. "I have already prepared everything. Your sovereignty, as long as you step into the hall, you'll be able to absorb the power you have lost and return to your peak," the black skeleton replied in agitation. "Good." Little Chick nodded before waddling over to the hall in big strides. The doors opened itself before Little Chick, and unimaginable power pulsated with the depths of the hall. It felt like an entire world of energy was harnessed inside there. "Little Chick." Zhongxian suddenly cried out just as it was about to enter the hall. Understanding Zhongxian's concerns, Little Chick turned around and said, "I know what you are worried about, but there's no need. I am myself and no one else." Zhongxian nodded quietly after hearing those words. Little Chick was a new will that was born after the resurrection of the deathless monarch. He was afraid that it would turn into someone else once it regained its strength and memories, spelling the death of the adorable Little Chick that he knew. The words that Little Chick said reassured him that it would not turn into someone else as a result of this. It was no longer the deathless monarch of old. It was someone else with a new will. Little Chick entered the hall, and the doors closed once again. Zhongxian and Luo Chichi waited outside, and just like that, 3 months passed. "Little Chick, continue doing your best. We need to return to the firmament now. If you can make it in time, you know where to find us." Almost 5 days had passed in the firmament, and if they did not head back, they would not be able to make it in time before Kongshe and Luo Ruoxin's duel. Even though it was nigh impossible for them to stop the duel without the assistance of the deathless monarch, Zhongxian could not allow himself to continue waiting there without doing anything. Let's go. Zhongxian beckoned for Luo Chichi before turning around to leave. Boom. At this moment, a crisp buzz echoed in the air, and the hall began to shake intensely. Cracks began appearing all over the grand building's Huala. The walls began to collapse, causing dust to fill the area. Amid the veil of dust, a massive phoenix could be seen rising from the rubble. The mere power it emanated was enough to keep others at a distance away from it. This is the deathless monarch. Zhongxian murmured with widened eyes. The strength of the phoenix before his eyes far exceeded his imagination. It was much stronger than the conferred God King and the will of Fairy Linglong that he had encountered before. So, this was the strength of the God Monarch. It was no wonder no conferred God Kings dared oppose a God Monarch. They were truly beings of vastly different levels. The resurrected little chick might be even stronger than the previous deathless monarch. Every single time little chick resurrected, it would get stronger than before. Perhaps it would be the same this time. If that was the case, they might just be able to stop the duel between those two. Chapter 22-24 The Visitation of a Monarch. Sometime later, the pressure emanated by the massive phoenix finally subsided. The massive phoenix morphed into a young man, who walked out to the rubble to appear before Zhongxian and Luo Chichi. Looking to be around 16 or 17, the young man had a tall but slightly thin figure. Contrary to what little chick had been exclaiming all this while, his face did not look heaven-defyingly suave. Instead, he appeared to be more youthful. It would be hard to think of this youthful man as the highest being in the sky of spirit origin, one of the god monarchs of the firmament. You are little chick. Master, the young man replied with a slight smile. Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief. It looked like what he had feared the most did not happen in the end. The other party was still the haughty and boastful little chick who had followed him from the master-teacher continent. Master, I have just recovered my powers, so I need some time to reinforce my cultivation. I'll cultivate here for a little longer so as to save time. For the time being, you should return to the firmament. Once I'm done, I'll head over to meet up with you right away. All right. Zhongxian nodded. If they were going to face two of the strongest god monarchs of the firmament, they would definitely have to be in their best condition, or else their efforts would only end in futility. Time in the azure flowed 100 times faster than in the firmament, so it would be much better to cultivate where he was. Feng Yao, thank you for guarding me all this while. I shall restore your body and your powers now. The young man turned to the black skeleton and tapped his finger lightly in the air. A droplet of blood flew forth from his hand and seeped into the forehead of the black skeleton. Tzz. Flesh and blood began growing out of the black skeleton before the piercing call of a phoenix echoed in the air. The black skeleton suddenly burst into flames, and a large phoenix rose out of the flames. The large phoenix quickly transmogrified into the form of a middle-aged man in a golden helmet and armor. He was one of the most loyal guardians of the deathless monarch, guarding his grave for the past thousands of years, awaiting his return. Let's head back. Knowing that nothing would happen to little chick there, Zhongxian called for Luo Chichi once more. They quickly traversed through space and returned to the azure. Heading to a higher world from a lower world was much easier than the other way around. The two of them slowly released the seal of their cultivation, and soon, they caught the eye of the heavens of the azure and were expelled into the chaotic space. It was then that Zhongxian finally released his full cultivation as a god king, and he immediately sensed the summoning of the firmament. Without any hesitation, they followed the summoning to head to the firmament. Half a day later, with a sudden jolt, the two of them landed on the ground. Looking around the area, Zhongxian realized that they were at the Grand Spirit Mountain, the place where he had first arrived in the firmament with Zhao Ya and the others. Where are we going now? Luo Chichi asked. We'll first be heading to Drifting Spectre Royal City before teleporting to the Sky of Freedom via the Great Displacement Teleportation Formation, Zhongxian said. Possessing the strength of God Kings, they no longer needed the City Lord token to use the Minor Displacement Teleportation Formation. Soon enough, they arrived at Drifting Spectre Royal City. This time, instead of leaving right away, he led Luo Chichi over to his residence. He wanted to pass the God King breakthrough pill that he had forged a while back at the sky of Linglong over to his parents and son Chong so that they could quickly become God Kings. This way, they would be able to protect themselves. Not wanting to cause a huge commotion, he discreetly made his way over to his residence without incurring anyone's notice. Young master. As soon as Zhongxian entered the residence, Sun Chong rushed forward to welcome him with an agitated look on his face. Over the past few days, Sun Chong's cultivation had reached middle-tier celestial god. It was clear that he had been working hard in order to raise his cultivation realm this quickly. "Where are my parents?" Zhongxian asked. "They are currently in the courtyard chatting with a guest," Sun Chong replied. "A guest?" Zhongxian frowned. "Gedeng." Feeling a bad premonition, he quickly rushed over to the courtyard, and there, he saw his parents sitting together with a guest sipping on fine tea. The guest was a young man in his early 20s. He had a well-defined face that showed hints of unshakable resilience. There was an aura of cool rationality around him, and his eyes felt deep, as if they were gazing into the future. What really left Zhongxian unnerved was how he was unable to sense the depths of the young man's cultivation. Behind the young man stood an elder whose back was slightly lowered. He stood firmly in his position, not moving or saying anything at all. "Is he a god monarch?" Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up in horror. After hearing Sun Chong's words, he used the spiritual perception to scan the entire courtyard, but he could only sense his parents' presence. If not for the fact that he was seeing the young man with his own two eyes, he would not have known that the other party was sitting there. Based on this alone, it was clear that the young man's strength far exceeded his. He might just be a god king at the moment, but with the pathos of heaven's cultivation technique and sword art, he would be able to put up a fight against conferred god kings. If he had to face Baiye Qinghong once more, he would be able to crush her easily without relying on the golden page. Yet, despite his strength, he did not think that he would be a match for the young man sitting before him. To make matters worse, his parents were actually sitting at the same table as him. How could he not be horrified? Upon seeing him, Sword Saint Meng immediately said with a smile, "This is my son, Zhongxian." It appeared that she was oblivious to how powerful the young man seated before her was. With a nod, the young man shot a glance over. It was just a look, but Zhongxian felt as if there was a sword severing through space to crush his soul. In fact, even the Library of Heaven's Path was trembling non-stop, as if it was fearful of the existence before it. "Are you the god monarch of the Sword Hut?" Zhongxian asked. Based on what he had heard so far, there were two elusive individuals among the 9 god monarchs. One of them was God Monarch Lingxi of the Sky of Freedom, and the other was the god monarch of the Sky of Heavenly Sword. Even if the Sword Hut did not seek talented geniuses and confer new god kings, there was still no god monarch who would dare wreak havoc in the Sky of Heavenly Sword. Clearly, the god monarch of the Sword Hut possessed strength that struck fear in the hearts of the other god monarchs. "Take a seat," the young man said. Zhongxian knew that he would not be able to stop the young man if the latter really made a move against him. Thus, he quietly walked over and took a seat. The elder behind him gracefully took a step forward and served him a cup of tea. Zhongxian accepted the cup of tea while feeling a little jittery inside. "If it's not too rude, may I know the reason behind the god monarch's visit?" If a god monarch wanted to meet him, he could have just sent a conferred god king over to invite him to his palace. Yet, this god monarch had gone all the way over to his residence, and from the current looks of it, it felt like not even the Chenkuan demon monarch of the Sky of Drifting Spectre had noticed his presence. This was really a little worrying. The young man did not respond to Zhongxian's question. Instead, he began to assess Zhongxian as if he was trying to evaluate the worth of a treasure, and soon, a conflicted look surfaced on his face. A moment later, he put down his teacup and asked, "Can you demonstrate the sword art that you've just comprehended for me?" "Sword art?" Zhongxian frowned. Was the god monarch of the Sword Hut there just to watch his sword art? Well, that might just be the case. Due to the limitations of his strength, the sword art he had comprehended was probably still nothing much to the god monarchs. However, there was no denying the fact that it was a battle technique that had surpassed the heavens, making it one of the finest sword arts in the firmament. As a renowned sword practitioner of the firmament, It was not too surprising for the god monarch to want to see and analyze it. With that thought in mind, Zhongshen finally heaved a sigh of relief. Chapter 22-25 Crimson Heaven Sword. Since the god monarch of the Sword Hut was there to watch his sword art, it should be safe to assume that he did not bear any malicious intentions toward them. Those who were obsessed with martial arts tended to have a pure and straightforward personality. They were less likely to beat around the bush, and they would not hurt others that easily. With such thoughts in mind, Zhongshen stood up and took out the God King's sword. The elder standing behind the young man raised his hand, and the courtyard was immediately surrounded by an isolation barrier, preventing others from seeing what was happening within. Seeing this sight, Zhongshen's eyebrows twitched a little. He was able to create isolation barriers on the spot as well, but the elder was able to do it with far greater ease, and he even infused spatial laws into the barrier to further reinforce it. From this feat, it could be seen that even though the elder was not a god monarch, the strength he wielded still far surpassed that of most conferred god kings. At the very least, Zhongshen knew that he would not be a match for the elder. Nevertheless, as long as the young man did not bear any ill will toward them, there was no point in thinking too deeply into this. Holding his god king's sword tightly, he allowed his consciousness to become one with the sword. Hula! The sword moved. A slight wind blew, and water ripples emerged on the surface of the nearby pond. With movements as smooth as flowing water, Zhongshen executed the four sword arts of the pathos of heaven one after another. His movements carried strong sentiments, bringing the onlookers into the conceptualization he had in his mind. The young man looked at the execution of the sword arts silently, seemingly enjoying the performance. Finally, Zhongshen retracted his blade, and the sword chi that he had released swiftly surged back into his sword. He clasped his fist and said, "It would be a delight if you could offer some pointers on my swordsmanship." The young man before him was known as the strongest sword practitioner in the firmament. Even a word of advice from the other party would surely benefit him greatly. The sword art you have comprehended is truly extraordinary. A smile finally appeared on the cold face of the young man as he spoke. "I don't think that there are any pointers I can offer you. You are paving your own way forward, so there's very little that I can help you with. I did notice something, however. Your sword carries a lot of yearning, and in return, it lacks resilience and protection." "Resilience and protection?" Zhongshen asked. Thinking about it, most of what the sentiments he had comprehended so far were indeed related to the idea of yearning. However, the sword art of the pathos of heaven was based upon the sentiments he carried toward those around him, so it was bound to carry some hints of yearning. Let me put it another way. If your loved ones are caught in a disaster and are in a life-threatening situation, what would you do? The young man asked. Slightly perplexed by the abrupt question, Zhongshen hesitated for a moment before replying, "Well, I would do my best to protect them from danger. And that's what I mean by protection. It's the act of shielding a person of danger regardless of the cost." "However, I don't sense such sentiments within your sword art," the young man replied. Zhongshen fell into deep thought. Indeed, his sword art was lacking such sentiments. A sword of sentiments shouldn't just carry yearning, it should carry the responsibility that comes along with it as well. Take your last sword for example. I could sense your yearning for your parents and the regrets of being unable to treat your loved ones better, but have you thought about the responsibilities that you should take on so as to avoid these regrets? The young man asked. I think I get what you are saying. Zhongshen nodded slowly. My swordsmanship is filled with past sentiments. It focuses on what has already happened instead of trying to influence what is going to happen. Subconsciously, I have been placing myself in a passive position all along. Indeed, if we wish to reach for higher heights, our eyes must be set in the future. Wallowing in emotions of self-reproach and yearning will only slow your footsteps, the young man replied. You're right. Zhongshen nodded in realization. Emotions could be classified into two types, those that helped people grow and mature and those that caused their footsteps to screech to a halt. A sorrowful experience could either be a reason to despair or a reason to drive one to work even harder. If we allow our emotions to bog us down, our lives will simply pass us by like a fleeting cloud. It will appear as if everything has been transient and meaningless. To give our life meaning, We have to continue marching forward even during times of hardship. Suffering is simply a part and parcel of life, be it aging, illness, death, parting, envy, hatred. We must learn to take pain in stride, and we must also learn how to let go of things. That's simply how life is. No matter how bitter things became, we would have to grit our teeth and force ourselves to look forward. Thank you for your guidance, Zhongxian said with a deep bow. He felt like he had just grasped something really important. Even though it was still very abstract, he felt like it could change the trajectory of his cultivation for good. It had been a short exchange, but he had benefited greatly from the guidance of the young man. I'm impressed that you managed to get it so quickly. It looks like you are the right person after all, the young man said with a smile before rising to his feet. I'll have to get going now. You only have yourself to rely on for the road ahead of you, so I can only wish you all the best. You're already leaving? Zhongxian was surprised. He had thought that there would be some deeper intent behind the young man's visit, but the latter had only seen his sword art and given a few pointers, and he was already going to leave. Or did this mean that the young man had made his way there just to give him some pointers? The young man glanced at the elder behind him and said, Jian Yao, give him the Crimson Heaven sword. 1. Yes. The elder nodded. With a flick of his wrist, the elder presented a sword respectfully to Zhongxian. As soon as the sword appeared, dimension rifts began appearing around the area. Even the God King sword in Zhongxian's hand struggled free of his grasp to pay respects to the sword in the elder's hands. Such a sight made Zhongxian's eyebrows shoot up in astonishment. The God King sword, just as its name suggested, was a God King realm artifact. It was the strongest weapon he had ever wielded. Yet, it had bowed down to the Crimson Heaven sword without any hesitation. How strong must the Crimson Heaven sword be then? I can't accept such a heavy gift from you. Zhongxian quickly clasped his fist and rejected the sword. There's no need to stand on ceremony. This is a sword that I forged specially for you several decades back. Take it, it belongs to you, the young man said without turning back. Several decades back. Zhongxian was baffled. I am only in my early 20s this year, and most of it was spent on the master-teacher continent. If I translate it into time in the firmament, I have only lived for slightly more than a month now. Yet, you said that you forged this sword for me several decades back. Nevertheless, seeing how the other party was determined to have him accept the gift, Zhongxian clasped his fist and said, "Thank you." Following that, he stretched his hand forward to grab the Crimson Heaven sword. As soon as he closed his hands on it, he could sense that it had already become his. The frightening pressure that it had emanated a moment ago vanished altogether, causing it to appear no different from an ordinary sword. The first thing Zhongxian noticed about the Crimson Heaven sword was that it had no weight or sword spirit at all. Strangely enough, he did not feel any discomfort holding the sword. It was as if the sword itself was nothing more than an extension of his arm. He felt like he could easily unleash devastating strength through this sword. If he executed the pathos of heaven with this sword, even the massive face that was created by fairy linglongs would be no match for him. Feeling deeply agitated within, Zhongxian quickly bowed deeply once more in order to express his gratitude. It was then that he suddenly thought of something, and he said with anticipation gleaming in his eyes, "Pardon me for my insolence, but I am very interested in sword arts. If it isn't too much to ask, it would be an honor to see your sword art." He felt like he could deepen his understanding of sword arts by looking at the other party's techniques. 1. The Crimson Heaven sword, otherwise known as the Kaixiao sword, is a sword used by Liu Bang, the founder of the Han dynasty. It is also known as the Sword of Ascendancy. Chapter 22-26 The God Monarch's Sword. Instead of replying, the young man turned around and beckoned with his finger lightly. Voila! The tea inside the teacups on the stone table gathered in the air to form a sword. Use your sword art to attack me. All right. TSLA. With a flick of Zhongxian's wrist, the Crimson Heaven sword tore through the air and filled the surroundings with surges of sword chi. A heart of intertwined threads. The young man took a step forward, and without any excessive actions, he raised the liquid sword in his hand and pierced forth. For an instant, Zhongxian thought that he had been locked down by a beast, rendering him unable to move. He felt like if he made an excessive movement, he would surely be struck down by the other party. Despite the simplicity of the young man's swordsmanship, Zhongxian could feel an air of valiance from his movements. It was the determination to tear down everything that stood ahead of him, as if he could not back down because his kin and family members were right behind him. Zhongxian knew that he would surely be cornered if he did not change his move, so he maneuvered his sword to execute his fourth sword art instead. It was the move carrying the conceptualization of indignation and yearning. However, the young man did not back down because of it. He continued to push his attack forward with indomitable momentum, like a sharp sword that would cut down anything in its path. Peng! The sword chi that had gathered was sliced in two, and Zhongxian himself was slammed into the pillar behind. Hula! The sword made of tea fell back to the ground as droplets. I lowered my cultivation to the same level as yours, God King Realm Primary Stage, the young man remarked. Yes, I noticed. Zhongxian nodded as he struggled to his feet. The God Monarch of the Sword Hut did not use his superior cultivation to suppress Zhongxian. He had lowered his cultivation to God King Realm Primary Stage, and with his own skill, he had subdued Zhongxian while he was wielding the Crimson Heaven Sword and using the pathos of Heaven Sword art. In the same cultivation realm, even when he was equipped with a powerful weapon, Zhongxian was still unable to defeat the other party. Ever since he started cultivating, he had only lost to his clone when they were in the same cultivation realm. This was the first time he had encountered such a powerful opponent. I hope that you are able to grasp the differences between the two concepts. How you interpret it and adapt your sword art is up to you, the young man said before turning around to leave. Please wait a moment, Zhongxian called out. The young man halted his footsteps. Elder, if I'm not mistaken, given your strength, you should be able to match the Heaven Subjugation Monarch and God Monarch Lingxi easily. Is it possible for you to stop the duel between the two of them? Zhongxian asked. He had no idea how powerful the other God Monarchs were, but without a doubt, the young man before him was an extremely formidable expert. He could not imagine the young man being anywhere weaker than Kongshe and Luo Ruoxin. If he could somehow convince the young man to interfere in the duel and stop the two of them, everything might work out fine. As slim as the chances were, he had to give it a try. Everyone has their own fate that they have to fulfill, and even God Monarchs are not spared from that. The duel between the two of them can't be stopped, and it mustn't be stopped. That is an inevitability, the young man replied calmly. Must one of them die? Zhongxian asked desperately. Is it not enough to just determine a victor between the two of them? There's no way around it, the young man replied with a grim voice. Then, he turned around and said, Your parents have a decent comprehension of swordsmanship. Send them over to the Sword Hut after they reach the God King realm. I'll guarantee their safety if anything happens. After saying those words, the young man and the elder's silhouettes began to fade before vanishing. Elder! Elder! Zhongxian called out, but there was no response. Knowing that the young man had really left, he could not help but sigh deeply. The words that the young man had said before he parted really left him with a horrible premonition. The other party mentioned that in the duel between Luo Ruoxin and Kongshe, one of them had to die. If even someone as powerful as the young man was unable to stop them, what could he possibly do to change the situation? Just what kind of fate was there between the two of them? Why did things have to come to this point? Luo Ruoxin was his girlfriend, and he had come all the way from the master-teacher continent to the firmament in order to find her. Kongshe was a person whom he had looked up to ever since his time on the master-teacher continent, and it would be no exaggeration to say that the other party was the one who had guided him thus far. Those two people were extremely important to him, and he could not stand the thought of seeing something happen to them. Everyone has their own fate to fulfill. What is fate then? Zhongxian muttered with an anxious expression on his face. Xianer. Just as Zhongxian was feeling flustered inside, he suddenly heard his mother's worried voice. He quickly snapped out of his state, raised his head, and smiled. I'm fine. Right, how's your cultivation going? With the cultivation technique and the pills you have provided us, your father and I have managed to reach high-tier celestial god realm pinnacle, Sword Saint Meng said with a smile as she revealed her strength. So fast. Zhongxian blinked in surprise. He could understand the two of them raising their zhenqi cultivation quickly, but it should have been much harder for them to raise their soul cultivation. He had only managed to advance his soul cultivation so quickly due to the steady inflow of anima of yearning from the sales of the beauty pill and the breakthrough pill. How did his parents manage to raise their soul cultivation so quickly? Sun Qiong bought quite a few medicinal herbs and pills that allowed us to advance our soul cultivation quickly, Sword Saint Meng explained. The sales of the breakthrough pills and beauty pills were bringing in a great deal of money to them every day. Through this great fortune and the unwavering support of the Qi clan, they were able to easily source and purchase pills that hastened the growth of one's soul cultivation. It was due to this that they had been able to raise their cultivation all the way up to high-tier celestial god realm pinnacle swiftly. I have 3 God King breakthrough pills for each of you. If you feel like you are ready to push for a breakthrough, it should provide you with the impetus you require to reach the God King realm, Zhongxian said as he passed the pills over. In the first place, he had prepared those specifically for them, so there was no need to hold on to them. Sun Qiong, we'll be heading over to the sky of Heavenly Sword right now. I want you to find a quiet place over there for my parents and you to cultivate in. Once all of you manage to become God Kings, head straight over to the Sword Hut to find the young man whom we met earlier. Even though he was in a rush to head over to the Sky of Freedom, he could not let his guard down when it came to his parents' safety. If they traveled manually to the Sky of Heavenly Sword, over the long journey, someone might just try to go after his parents in order to uncover the secret behind the beauty pill and the breakthrough pill. After all, it was a lucrative business that would solve the financial problems faced by any major power. It would be far safer if they took the Great Displacement Teleportation Formation instead. With his recent growth in his cultivation and Luo Chichi's ability to control space, they should be able to ensure his parents and Sun Qiong's safety while making the trip over. So, they quickly headed over to the Great Displacement Teleportation Formation. Zhongxian passed the token over to Sun Qiong, and with him escorting his father and Luo Chichi escorting his mother, the 5 of them quickly made their way over to the Sky of Heavenly Sword. Fortunately, while it was not easy for them to protect someone while traveling through the teleportation formation, they managed to pull it off without a hitch. Before bidding his parents farewell, Zhongxian entrusted the God King's sword to his father, Sword Saint Xing, and helped him tame it. With their swordsmanship and the God King's sword, they should be able to defeat even an ordinary God King with ease, so there was no need to worry about their safety. Let's head to the Sky of Freedom, Zhongxian said. Together with Luo Chichi, they entered the Great Displacement Teleportation Formation once more. Even if it was going to be hard, he was determined to stop the battle between Luo Ruoxin and Kongsha. For this, he was willing to put his life on the line. Chapter 22-27 Sky of Freedom. Freedom Royal City was built in the middle of a massive mountain range. Unlike the royal cities of the other skies, which were bound strictly by rules, it had no city walls nor guards. Due to that, it did not feel as stifling as the other cities. There were all sorts of vegetables, tamed beasts, weapons, and pills on sale at the market square. There were pots filled with salted meat and pickled vegetable. If Zhongxian had to use one word to describe the city, it would be that it was chaotic. In the Sky of Freedom, everyone is free to do whatever they wish. There are no rules tying them down, Luo Chichi explained as they walked through the streets. Unlike the rest of the 9 skies, there were no rules, no guards, and no armies in the Sky of Freedom, and yet, none of the other skies dared to provoke it in any way. From one perspective, it could be considered a paradise. Chaotic as it might be, there was still some sort of indescribable and invisible order in place. Zhongxian nodded. The Sky of Freedom was very different from any place he had ever seen. The cultivators lived much more comfortable lives than those from the other skies, and they were determined to protect their way of life. Anyone who tried to destroy their haven would have to face their wrath. Just like that, in its own unique way, the Sky of Freedom towered over the rest of the 9 skies. Zhongxian entered one of the larger markets, stopped a high-tier celestial god, and asked, "Pardon me, but do you know where God Monarch Lingxi resides?" Sensing the powerful auras that Zhongxian and Luo Chichi were emanating, the high-tier celestial god replied without any hesitation, "Based on what I know, Her Sovereignty usually spends her time cultivating on Lingxi Mountain over there." However, it might not be that easy to get there. Thank you. Looking at the direction the high-tier celestial god had pointed out, Zhongxian saw a mountain peak shrouded in a layer of fog in the distance. So, the two of them quickly made their way over. At first, the mountain appeared to be relatively close, but no matter how the two of them tried to fly toward it, they were not able to get close to it at all. Despite having flown for an hour now, it did not seem like they had gotten any closer to the mountain at all. It felt like they would never reach it at this rate. In a sense, it felt similar to how no matter how hard one tried to head toward the sun, it would simply look as large and brilliant as it always did. Even if a person walked for their entire life, they would never be able to reach it. Knowing that it was futile, Zhongxian raised his head and shouted, "Luo Ruoxin, I know that you knew that I would come. I want to meet you." Without a doubt, the other party must have done something to prevent him from ever reaching the mountain. Since that was the case, he might as well get straight to the point. Who? As expected, right after he said those words, a series of spatial ripples appeared before him, and a woman appeared from them. She appeared to be around 17 or 18, and she was dressed in green. "Young Master Zhongxian, please return." The green-robed lady bowed deeply as she spoke. "Our young mistress is currently preparing for her battle with the Heaven Subjugation Monarch, and she can't afford to allow her concentration to waver at a moment like this. If you really care for her, I'll have to ask you not to disrupt her at such a critical time. In a clash between experts, the slightest opening revealed can result in disastrous consequences." Zhongxian clenched his fists tightly. In a fight between experts, the slightest lapse in concentration could easily result in a calamity. If his sudden appearance affected her battle with Kongshe, he would never be able to forgive himself. But he could not give up. Just like how two hands were needed to clap, a duel was also a fight between two people. He just needed to meet one of them in order to understand the reason behind the fight. Understanding Zhongxian's intentions, Luo Chichi asked with a confused tilt of her head, "But where are you going to find him?" "We don't know where he is at the moment. The 9 god monarchs governed the 9 skies, but the Heaven Subjugation Monarch was a god monarch who had only risen to power 40 years ago. He did not have any territory of his own, so no one knew where he resided. Unless the latter decided to appear, there was almost no way they could know where he was. Given that the duel is just around the corner, there's a good chance that he's already in Freedom Royal City at the moment," Zhongxian said. "As long as we look around, we should be able to find him." So, the two of them quickly returned to Freedom Royal City. However, looking at the massive expanse of buildings all around her, Luo Chichi exclaimed, "How can we find him among so many people within Freedom Royal City? In the first place, there was probably no one who would be so foolish as to reveal the whereabouts of a god monarch of their own accord. If they looked around the city by themselves, how long would it take for them to look through the hundreds of millions of people within the city? Well, we can try Freedom Royal City's Master Teacher Pavilion first," Zhongxian said. Luo Chichi was stunned for a moment before nodding in realization. Indeed. Since the Master Teacher Pavilion was a power under Kongshe, it should have a way to get in contact with him. So, as long as they headed to the Master Teacher Pavilion, they should be able to figure something out from there. The Master Teacher Pavilion was a power that had risen to prominence over the past few decades, so it was not too difficult to figure out where they were located. It did not take long before the two of them arrived at their destination. The Sky of Freedom had no rules, so there were no restrictions on the development of an occupation. As such, many guilds had chosen to base their headquarters in Freedom Royal City. Compared to the Master Teacher Pavilion's the other skies, Freedom Royal City's Master Teacher Pavilion was bustling with huge crowds. There were many cultivators who were visiting the Master Teacher Pavilion in order to find a teacher to study under. Entering the building together with the crowd, Zhongxian saw quite a few master teachers lecturing within. It was starting to take the shape of what he had seen many times back on the Master Teacher continent. Looking at the crowds that were continuously passing them, Luo Chichi turned to Zhongxian and asked, "Are we looking for their pavilion master?" If they wanted to get in contact with the Heaven Subjugation Monarch, they had to at least get in contact with the pavilion master. "That would be too much trouble," Zhongxian replied. He took a deep breath before bellowing with a deafening voice, Zhongxian has come to challenge the head of the Master Teacher Pavilion. I ask you to come out and meet me. Chapter 22-28 The meeting between Kong and Zhong. A person has come to challenge the pavilion master? Is he here to crash the pavilion? He must be courting death to dare crash our Master Teacher Pavilion. Hold on a moment, did you hear his name? He called himself Zhongxian, right? Is he the apothecary behind the beauty pill and breakthrough pill? That's the only Zhongxian in the firmament that I know of. I heard that he killed conferred god King Baiye Qinghong of the sky of Linglong just a few days ago. A commotion broke out in the surroundings. The master teachers who had charged out in hordes to protect the reputation of their Master Teacher Pavilion, upon hearing that even conferred god King Baiye Qinghong had not been a match for the young man, faltered a little. They quietly inched back as they waited for someone with greater authority to deal with the situation. A person who could kill even a conferred god king was definitely beyond their ability to deal with. I am the head of the Freedom Royal City Master Teacher Pavilion. Apothecary Zhong, this way please. A grey-bearded old man walked out from the corridors and ushered Zhongxian in. His cultivation felt condensed and powerful. Just like Zhongxian, he was a god king. Nodding, Zhongxian followed him into the inner halls of the Master Teacher Pavilion. After walking a distance, the old man took a glance behind him, and after ensuring that there was no one around, he halted his footsteps and turned to face Zhongxian. Apothecary Zhong, I was anticipating your visit. I'll lead you over to where his sovereignty is right away. You're aware that I'm here to meet the Heaven Subjugation Monarch? Zhongxian was surprised. He had thought that he would have to fight a battle before forcing the other party to bring him to the Heaven Subjugation Monarch, but who could have known that he would hear such words from the other party? His sovereignty instructed me to take you to him directly if you came here, the old man replied with a smile. With a wave of his hand, a teleportation formation appeared before the two of them. Let's go. After saying those words, the old man stepped into the teleportation formation, and Zhongxian and Luo Chichi quickly followed him. Wang. With a burst of light, the two of them were brought to an ordinary-looking room. Sitting on a chair right in front of him was an elder with an amicable look on his face. It was none other than Kongsha. There were a group of god kings and conferred god kings standing in rows by the two sides of the room. Taking a glance around, Zhongxian's eyebrows shot up. There were actually quite a few whom he recognized. Ancient Sage Zi Yuan, Ancient Sage Ran Qiu, Ancient Sage Bo Shong, Ancient Sage Zi Gong. The 10 apostles and 72 sages were actually among them. Even the weakest of them was a high-tier celestial god. There were more than 10 of them above the God King realm, meaning that Kongsha's influence was nowhere weaker than any of the 9 skies. Just that, had he not seen the corpses of Ancient Sage Zi Yuan and a few others prior to entering the Azure? Why were they completely unharmed? While Zhongxian was perplexed, he knew that this was not the time to be asking questions. So, he walked to the center of the room, bowed deeply, and said, Junior Zhongxian pays respects to Kongsha. With just a look, he could tell that the other party was indeed the revered world's teacher. There was no way to fake it this time. You are finally here, Kongsha said with a faint smile. He glanced at his disciples around the room and said, the rest of you should take your leave. Yes, teacher. Ancient Sage Zi Yuan nodded before ushering the others out. Chichi, you should wait outside for me, too, Zhongxian said. All right. If there's anything you need me for, call for me right away, Luo Chichi replied with a nod. Soon, only Zhongxian and Kongsha were left in the room. Take a seat. With a wave of Kongsha's hand, a chair flew over and landed right behind Zhongxian. However, the latter did not settle down on the chair right away. Instead, he lowered his head apologetically and said, Kongsha, I am indebted to you for guiding me while I was still on the Master Teacher continent, but due to several circumstances, I ended up capturing your clone. With a flick of his wrist, Zhongxian released Kongsha's clone, which he had captured back in the Azure. He is something that I have severed from my will, an existence that was born from me. I thought that I had him suppressed in the Azure, but I didn't think that he would be able to overcome the seal with time, Kongsha replied. He seemed to be aware of the happenings in the Azure, and he was not displeased with Zhongxian's actions at all. With a flick of his finger, his clone was reduced to a wisp of green smoke before vanishing altogether. After that was done, Kongsha smiled quietly before remarking, "I was intending to send a sliver of my will down to the Azure to suppress him, but I dropped that thought after I saw you entering the Azure. Your deeds there really didn't disappoint me. You are aware of my actions in the Azure?" Zhongxian was surprised. The Azure and the firmament were severed by the dimension barrier, making it nigh impossible to travel or communicate between the two worlds. Yet, Kongsha knew of what had happened in the Azure. In response to his question, Kongsha replied, "Just like you, I came here from the Master-Teacher continent and the Azure. I left my will and a few hands in those two worlds in case of emergencies. While it's indeed highly difficult for me to descend to the lower worlds from here, I'm still able to keep track of what's happening in those two worlds to some extent." With his current cultivation realm, not even God Monarch Lingxi would dare claim that she was stronger than him. Naturally, he also possessed means that matched his strength. That makes sense. Zhongxian nodded. Even though Deathless Monarch came nowhere close to matching God Monarch Lingxi and Kongsha, he was still able to send messages down to Du Qingyuan through the seal of Supreme Monarch. Kongsha was known for his exceptional proficiency in a multitude of occupations, and his students were all overflowing with talent. Given so, it should not be too hard for him to achieve that. Within such a short period of time, you have risen to prominence across numerous worlds, shining even brighter than me, Kongsha said as he stroked his beard with a heartening smile. All this time, he had been observing Zhongxian's actions. Initially, he had thought that the young man was like a fleeting shooting star that only shone splendidly for an instant, but he continued to accomplish feat after feat that amazed those around him. In just 2 short years, he had ascended from the Master-Teacher continent to the firmament, and now, the young man was standing before him as a god-king. He never would have thought that it was possible for someone to grow so quickly. "You are gracious with your compliments," Zhongxian replied with a hint of redness on his face. He felt like the reason he could grow this quickly was due to a predecessor standing in front of him, showing him the way. If not for Kongsha founding the Master-Teacher Pavilion and cultivating techniques such as the Saint Ascension Decipher, there was no way he would have been able to grow that quickly. He might not have been able to come so far. "All right, let's drop the pleasantries and get straight to the point, shall we? I understand the reason for your visit," Kongsha said. "You are worried about the duel I am going to have with God Monarch Lingxi, and you're here to talk me out of it, right?" "Yes, that's indeed my intention." Zhongxian nodded. He did not think that he would be able to hide his thoughts from Kongsha, so he decided to get straight to the point. "I'll give you a clear answer, that's impossible. The duel is inevitable. I am unable to avoid it, and the same goes for you," Kongsha replied with a shake of his head. "The same goes for me." Zhongxian was stunned. This was supposed to be a duel between the Heaven Subjugation Monarch and God Monarch Lingxi. How was he involved in this matter? Kongsha mused over his words for a moment before asking, "You have comprehended the ability of the Heaven's imperfections, right?" "Yes, I have," Zhongxian replied with a nod. "The ability that I have comprehended is the Heaven's order. I believe that you should be aware of that as well," Kongsha said. Zhongxian nodded once again. He had learned about that from the will Kongsha had left behind in the Azure's Hall of Gods, so it was no secret to him anymore. Be it the Heaven's order or the Heaven's imperfections, they are all a part of the Heavens. They are an integral part to the Heavens, Kongsha said as he gazed at the sky outside of the room with a faraway look in his eyes. Gedung. Zhongxian's heart suddenly jolted as a thought came to him. Could it be that Ruoxin, God Monarch Lingxi, also possesses a fragment of the Heavens? Could this be the inevitability that everyone had been talking about all this time? Was that why he was attracted to Luo Ruoxin despite being incapable of feeling any romantic feelings for anyone else? Was that why Luo Ruoxin seemed to know about the existence of the Library of Heaven's path right from the start? Perhaps, the fragments of the Heavens were able to sense each other's existences instinctively, and they were drawn to one another. Chapter 22-29 War of the Heavens. It's just as you have thought. It is the War of the Heavens, Kongsha replied. It's a fight that cannot and must not be avoided. All forces of the world congregate and disperse with time. This is a natural and inevitable cycle. No one can escape it. If I win, I'll become the new overseer of the heavens. If I lose, my soul will dissipate, and everything will end right there. The war of the heavens. Zhongxian's face paled. Then, she and I. Did that not mean that he would have to eventually fight Luo Ruoxin as well? Would they have to compete for supremacy, too? Was this the reason she was unwilling to accept him when he fell in love with her, even coming up with all sorts of excuses to reject him? Back then, he had thought that there was some compelling power behind her that prevented them from getting together, but that was not the case at all. In the War of the Heavens, there could only be one survivor. Back when they were on the master-teacher continent, he had asked her many times for her real identity, but he had never been able to receive a concrete answer. Thinking back, it was not that she had been unwilling to speak, she simply could not do so. If she had revealed her true identity to him in advance, there was no saying how the heavens would have reacted to the divulging of the secret. They might even have had to fight one another in a life-and-death battle prematurely. If I win, the enemy you will have to face in the future is me. If I lose, it will be you and her battling one another. This is fate, and there's nothing we can do about it, Kongsha said with a composed voice. Even though it was his life and death that they were talking about, he was still able to remain completely rational about it. Are the heavens you are referring to the heavens of the firmament? Zhongxian asked. Is there really no way to avoid it? There isn't. Kongsha shook his head. But, isn't the firmament still functioning fine? Cultivators can rise through the ranks, and life is still thriving. If the heavens are really severed into fragments, that shouldn't be the case, Zhongxian exclaimed. If the heavens of the firmament were really divided among the three of them, the world should have been in utter chaos. Yet, that was not what Zhongxian had seen. Thriving. Kongsha shook his head bitterly. The firmament stopped thriving 40 years ago. The spiritual energy started receding, and many plants and beasts went extinct. Cultivators were forced to live within cities, and most of the population can't acquire the aura of divinity they require to make a breakthrough. There is a huge strain on the supply of cultivation resources. We might have survived till now, but give it another several hundred years or so, and everything would be utterly barren. Life might not even exist then. Zhongxian fell silent. He knew that the other party was right. It had only been 40 years since the receding of spiritual energy began, but a huge part of the firmament had already turned inhospitable. Innumerable lives had been lost as a result of that. Many cultivators, due to the scarcity of resources, were unable to raise their cultivation anymore. With the resources accumulated in the firmament throughout the innumerable years since its creation, the firmament was still able to continue functioning. However, how long could its resources last? When all the celestial gods from 40 years ago met their end, how many celestial gods would there be to replace them? What about god-kings and conferred god-kings? As the spiritual energy in the air grew scarcer and scarcer, how many people would eventually die of starvation? He did not even dare imagine that. Was this the effect of the fragmentation of the heavens? Isn't there the flood of spiritual energy? Zhongxian asked. I heard that it's possible to acquire plenty of resources during that period. The flood of spiritual energy was a natural phenomenon of the world that had happened once every decade since the receding of spiritual energy. Each time it happened, it would bring innumerable resources over to the firmament, allowing the withering plants in the barren lands to continue surviving. For that reason, even though the Grand Spirit Mountain had been deprived of spiritual energy for a very long time, there were still many plants that still persisted to this day. If you view the firmament as a building, the heavens are the pillars propping up the building, Kongsha said. Right now, the pillars are divided between you and me. It's only a matter of time before the building collapsed at this rate. The flood of spiritual energy is nothing more than temporary support structures put in place. While it can slow the rate of the collapse, it is nothing more than a temporary stopgap measure the world has put in place, and it can't be sustained for too long. Furthermore, a huge disruption occurs each time the flood of spiritual energy occurs. Cultivators resort to any means necessary to obtain more cultivation resources. While it looks like it's the force maintaining the stability of the firmament, it's actually hastening its death. Do you know many gods, celestial gods, and god kings die in each flood of spiritual energy? Those words left Zhongxian in deep thought. These were the secrets of the firmament. The figures were not recorded in any of the books that he had read previously. There is no way to count the number of gods and celestial gods, but before the floods of spiritual energy began, there were more than 300 conferred god kings and 1,000 god kings in the firmament. 300 conferred god kings and 1,000 god kings? Zhongxian's body jolted. Based on what he knew, there were only 30 conferred god kings and 100 god kings around. In other words, the firmament had already lost 90% of its strongest experts. If so, how many celestial gods and gods had died over the years? The heavens of the firmament cannot remain incomplete any longer. If we allow it to remain fragmented, the situation will only continue to worsen over time. The world will be further destabilized, and all beings will suffer, Kongsha said grimly. He could not simply sit still as the world was torn into pieces. Is there no choice but to sacrifice one of us in order to save the rest of the world? Is it not possible to sustain the heavens together? Zhongxian asked. If the heavens could be divided, was there a chance that they could govern each jurisdiction of heavens separately and ensure that everything continued running as normal? Of course not. The heavens are an integrated existence, and it is sustained by a delicate harmony. The only way to stabilize it is to merge it back together as one. It's impossible to control the heavens separately through the fragments, Kongsha replied. It's similar to a series of cogs within a system. They are useless if we tear them apart and use them separately. Hearing those words, Zhongxian suddenly thought of something and asked, if that's the case, Ruoxin already knew that I controlled a fragment of the heavens during our time back on the Master-Teacher continent, so why didn't she kill me? And it's the same for you, Kongsha. If you wanted to, you could kill me right away and grab my fragment of the heavens. Wouldn't it be in your interest to do so? Zhongxian was not so arrogant as to think that he would be more important than the entire firmament combined. If killing him could save the entire firmament, it was hard to understand why Kongsha and Luo Ruoxin had not made a move yet. After all, when he first met Luo Ruoxin at the Master-Teacher continent, he was no more than an ordinary mortal from a lower world. There were no feelings between them. There should have been no reason for Luo Ruoxin not to make a move. For Kongsha, if he could obtain the Library of Heaven's Path, he could become even stronger, thus increasing his chances of surpassing Luo Ruoxin and defeating her in the upcoming battle. Why was he not doing so? Putting aside everything about saving the firmament, being able to control the heavens meant gaining supreme dominance over the world. This was a great temptation that hardly anyone could resist. Kill you. Kongsha looked at Zhongxian with a glint in his eyes before sighing deeply. If I could save the rest of the firmament by killing you, I would bear the sin for doing so. However, that wouldn't work. At the very least, it isn't time yet. Chapter 22:30 Night of the Full Moon. Why? Zhongxian asked in confusion. He did not understand what the difference between him and Luo Ruoxin was. The two of them possessed the fragments of the heavens, so why could his fragment of the heavens not be snatched? Was it because he was too weak? You haven't become a god monarch on par with us yet, Kongsha replied. Only upon reaching this level can the fragment of heavens inside you be said to have fully matured. Otherwise, the imbalance in power would make it impossible to fuse the two fragments together, possibly causing a collapse in harmony instead. Zhongxian nodded in realization. If one viewed the different fragments of the heavens as separate powers, it would be of paramount importance to ensure that those powers were on par with one another before fusing them together. Otherwise, it would just lead to one power suppressing the other, resulting in internal disharmony within the body. If so, instead of saving the world, he could very well be harming everyone instead. The firmament and the heavens, huh? Zhongxian muttered with a bitter look on his face. It was no wonder everyone said that it was impossible to avoid this life-and-death duel. He could see what was going on now. This was the fate that was destined for the three of them. If they attempted to defy this fate, it would only spell the end of the world. Is there really no other way? Zhongxian asked silently. All along, he had been grateful that he had the library of Heaven's Path with him. However, rather than a blessing, it turned out to be an obligation instead. I have been thinking hard over the years, and I did manage to come up with an idea. However, I don't know whether it's truly feasible or not. You are very fortunate to be walking on a different path from mine. Perhaps you will reach heights that I'll never be able to, Kongsha said with a gentle smile. It felt like he had really seen through life and death, paying nearly no heed to it at all. A different path from yours? Zhongxian asked in confusion. Well, the secrets of the heavens mustn't be divulged, or else it could lead to unintended consequences. It's all up to you. In any case, God Monarch Lingxi and I have already done everything that we need to. As for how far you can go, that's up to you, Kongsha said. Seeing how the other party was unwilling to talk about this matter, Zhongxian knew that it was pointless for him to continue probing. So, he asked about another matter instead. Kongsha, I have comprehended the heavens' imperfections whereas you have comprehended the heavens' order. Do you know what God Monarch Lingxi has comprehended? That was the one thing that he had been curious about all this while. If the heavens had been split into 3 fragments, what was it that Luo Ruoxin had comprehended? Why could Luo Ruoxin sense him whereas he was unable to feel anything at all? I am also quite curious about that. Kongsha replied with a shake of his head. You don't know either? Zhongxian was taken aback. In order to investigate Kongsha, Luo Ruoxin went all the way down to the Master Teacher continent in order to uncover his abilities, and yet, Kongsha did not even know what kind of abilities Luo Ruoxin possessed. How was he intending to win the duel like that? Over the past 40 years, I have spent my time comprehending the nature of the heavens of the firmament. Despite its deficiency, it was still able to sustain itself without completely collapsing. It felt like there was some sort of power working in the background to protect the lives in the firmament, Kongsha suddenly remarked. There were many things that he could not talk to his direct disciples about, and his relationship with the 9 god monarchs was poor. In the end, it turned out that the only person he could really confide in was Zhongxian. Do you mean to say is that the power that is working in the background has something to do with Ruoxin? So, has she comprehended something along the lines of the heavens' protection? Zhongxian asked. Despite the uncompassionate nature of the heavens, it still provided the environment that allowed countless lives to thrive within it. For example, the environment of his previous world had been so intricately designed to shelter the life living on it from most harm, be it the ozone layer or the elements that make up each habitat. This could be the way in which the heavens protected the world. Could this be the final fragment of the firmament? It's possible, but what I have in mind is different from that, Kongsha said with a shake of his head. I believe that the ability she has comprehended has something to do with the heavens' nature. Due to that, the people of the Sky of Freedom highly respect autonomy and freedom. As for the heavens' protection, I think that it is a notion embedded within the idea of the heavens' nature. I see. Zhongxian nodded. It's all conjecture on my part at the moment. It'll take some looking into in order to figure out the truth, Kongsha said with a smile. Zhongxian was silent for a moment before he asked, How confident are you in the fight? Not very. However, it won't be that easy to bring me down, Kongsha replied with a composed yet deeply confident tone. He had come a long way to reach where he currently was. He had founded the Master Teacher Pavilion and the Ethereal Hall, and he had single-handedly challenged 8 of the god monarchs, allowing his reputation to echo all over the world. He was confident that no matter what kind of adversities stood in his path, he would be able to overcome them eventually. Seeing this, Zhongxian could not help but sigh once more. There was no way to get around this. If Kongsha won, it would spell Luo Ruoxin's death, and vice versa. There was no way to circumvent it. But after hearing Kongsha's words, he knew that it was futile for him to struggle to stop this duel. The War of the Heavens was a fight that they would not be able to escape. It was their responsibility and obligation to see the fight to the end. There's no need to worry. Sensing Zhongxian's worries, Kongsha chuckled softly beneath his breath. But just as he was about to say something, the spiritual energy in the air suddenly began trembling, swiftly becoming frighteningly violent. At the same time, The earth also began to tremor. Both Zhongxian and Kong Shi quickly walked out of the room, and looking at the dark sky, they saw a full moon. Its brilliant silver light shone coldly upon the lands. Teacher. The disciples whom Kong Shi had gestured to leave earlier had gathered once more, and they looked at their teacher with eyes reddened in agitation. The night of the full moon had come, and the battle was about to begin. We have walked a long journey together, and you know my temperament. Life and death are part and parcel of life. Once autumn sinks in, unfortunate as it may be, leaves will be shed, and flowers will wither. However, that is all in preparation for a new spring, Kong Shi said. If I fail to return from the duel, you are to serve Zhongxian as your new leader. With him around, you'll be safe from danger. I understand, Kong Shi's direct disciples replied. Me? Everyone here is my senior, so how can I take on this responsibility? Zhongxian was taken aback. Be it ancient sage Ran Qiu, ancient sage Zi Yuan, ancient sage Bo Shong, or ancient sage Qiu Wu. They were all his seniors, and he had benefited greatly from their guidance in the past. It did not seem appropriate for him to become their leader. As someone who has a fragment of the heavens, you should be more confident in yourself, Kong Shi said with a wave of his hand. But my strength is still lacking. His cultivation was only at God King Realm primary stage, and it would likely take him a long time before he could reach the pinnacle stage, let alone conferred God King. Given that ancient sage Zi Yuan and the others were all stronger than him, he could not help but feel deeply pressured becoming their leader. Your strength is only temporary. You have comprehended a cultivation technique that surpasses the heavens, so it's only a matter of time before you become a transcendental existence, Kong Shi said with a smile. You don't need to worry too much about it. I am only saying this if the worst-case scenario comes to be. If I come back alive, the final duel will eventually be between you and me. Zhongxian was speechless for a moment before nodding in resignation. All right, I'll take good care of the master-teacher pavilion. It would be unbecoming of him to turn down the request of someone who could very well lose his life in the duel. Nodding with a satisfied smile, Kong Shi said, the duel is about to begin. I'll be heading off now. Farewell. Who? Right after saying those words, Kong Shi leaped into the air and swiftly flitted toward the full moon. Kong Shi, take me there as well. Zhongxian quickly shouted. This was a duel that involved Kong Shi and Luo Ruoxin. Even if he could not stop it, he wanted to witness it with his own eyes. However, Kong Shi had already completely vanished from sight, seemingly having missed his words. Chapter 2231 Above the Moon. Zhongxi, watching the fight between two god monarchs is very dangerous. The shockwaves of their clashes could easily claim your life. You might be harmed if you head over recklessly, ancient sage Zi Yuan said. But toward those words, Zhongxian simply shook his head. How could he possibly not know that? But this was a fight involving those two. He could not simply sit there doing nothing at all. He dashed into the air as well with his flight ability as a god king, but he realized that his movement speed was simply too slow. By the time he reached the battlefield, it would have ended. Young master, am I late? Just as Zhongxian was panicking, a voice suddenly echoed behind him. Turning around, he saw a young man looking at him with a smile. Zhongxian's eyes lit up upon seeing the young man, and he exclaimed anxiously, "You came at the perfect time. Take me to the battle." It was none other than little Chick, who had been reinforcing his cultivation back in the azure. It had been roughly half a day since Zhongxian returned to the firmament, but for the azure, more than 2 months had passed. This period was more than enough for him to fully reinforce his cultivation and return to his peak. Let's go. With a nod, little Chick slit through the fabric of space and pulled Zhongxian in with him. In the blink of an eye, the two of them had vanished from sight. It's too dangerous for them to watch a fight between the two god monarchs. Ancient sage Zi Yuan was going to stop them, but he was not able to make it in time. He could not help but frown upon seeing what had happened. On the other hand, Luo Chichi chuckled and said, there should be no need to worry if that young man who appeared earlier is accompanying him. Who is? Ancient sage Zi Yuan turned his gaze to Luo Chichi, but halfway through his words, realization suddenly struck him, and he narrowed his eyes in astonishment. It can't be that. He is the deathless monarch. His teacher had fought with most of the god monarchs of the 9 skies, so ancient sage Zi Yuan was able to recognize most of them. The only ones whom he had never met before were the god monarch of the sky of freedom and the deathless monarch. Luo Chichi nodded in response to those words. But the young man earlier addressed Zhongxian as young master. Kong Shi's direct disciples were dazed. To be honest, they were a little dissatisfied with their teacher abruptly telling them to take Zhongxian as their new leader, but out of respect for their teacher, they had chosen to follow his orders. But who could have known that the young man would actually have a god monarch as his servant? They knew full well just how powerful the god monarchs were, so they could not imagine what the young man could have possibly done to tame a god monarch. This was ridiculous. Even though he has the protection of the deathless monarch, a battle between the god monarchs is still extremely dangerous. Zhongshe won't be able to do anything there, so he'd be much better off waiting here for the results, ancient sage Boshong said. Indeed. If the god monarch of the sky of freedom learns that he's our teacher's successor and tries to hold him hostage, that could very well throw our teacher off guard and expose him to unnecessary danger, ancient sage Zi Yuan said. The key problem was that Zhongxian could be a liability to Kongshe once the god monarch of the sky of freedom knew about their relationship. All the other party had to do was intentionally utilize a sliver of her strength against Zhongxian in order to put their teacher in a disadvantageous position. Your worry is unfounded. Knowing what Kongshe's direct disciples were worrying about, Luo Chichi shook her head bitterly. The god monarch of the sky of freedom would never make a move on him. Why's that? Ancient sage Zi Yuan asked with a frown. You shouldn't underestimate what humans will do when they are in danger. Rules and morals become secondary concerns in such a situation. The god monarch of the sky of freedom had gone to the extent of finding a way to descend to the master-teacher continent in order to figure out their teacher's abilities. Given how determined she was to win the duel, how could one be certain that she would not use a hostage to force Kongshe to submit to her? In a life-and-death duel, the only thing that mattered was winning. After all, it would be the end of everything once one lost. I would still have second thoughts if it was any other god monarch, but when it comes to the god monarch of the sky of freedom, there's no way that she would hurt Zhongxian. That's because... Luo Chichi sighed deeply. That's because she's Zhongxian's girlfriend. Girlfriend? Ancient sage Zi Yuan, ancient sage Boshong, and the others were all stunned. The young man was the successor of their teacher, the young master of the deathless monarch, and he was the girlfriend of god monarch Lingxi too? What the heck was wrong with that young man? Why in the world did he have so many identities? With a flicker of space, Zhongxian found himself appearing above a flat, empty space that extended all the way to the horizon. There was not a sliver of spiritual energy or vitality in the air. It was an utterly desolate environment. Where are we? Zhongxian asked with a frown. If not for his cultivation having reached the God King realm, he would probably have found it hard to survive in such an environment, let alone watch the battle. We are above the moon, Little Chick replied. Moon? Zhongxian repeated in bewilderment. It was also at this moment that he realized that the land he was standing on was emanating a silvery shimmer. There were brilliant stars all around him, and the massive firmament floated some distance away. They were indeed on the moon. He did not think that they would come all the way to the moon in the blink of an eye. God monarchs sure were terrifying existences. Looking around him, Zhongxian realized that there were quite a few people standing in the vicinity. Yet, for some reason, his spiritual perception was unable to perceive their presence clearly. The owner of the massive face that he had seen back in the sky of Linglong was among the crowd. Surprisingly, he did not see the young man who had given him some pointers on his swordsmanship a while back, but the elder who had been standing behind him back then was there. Most likely, the god monarch of the sword hut had teleported him there to witness the battle as his representative. So, they are the 9 god monarchs, Zhongxian muttered. Those who were qualified to watch this battle were mostly the god monarchs. They were the only ones who were able to go there so quickly in order to watch the battle, and they were also the only ones who could protect themselves from the shockwaves of the battle. It's beginning, Little Chick said. Raising his head, Zhongxian saw 2 figures standing loftily on 2 mountains located several thousand li away. One of them was an old man who had a snowy beard that drifted along with the wind, and his eyes were filled with deep compassion for the world. The other was a young lady who had fluttering black hair and her eyes filled with the cool regality of a monarch. Luo Ruoxin. Zhong Xian clenched his fists tightly together. He had been thinking about her ever since they parted on the master-teacher continent, and he had thought up scenes of how their reunion would be many times before. But he had never thought that this would be it. She would actually be fighting a life-and-death duel with another person who was also important in his life. Boom, boom, boom. He could not clearly see what happened, but a crack suddenly appeared in the world. Countless lightning bolts devastated the ground, and the surface of the moon trembled non-stop. Amid countless black rifts, the floating Luo Ruoxin and Kongsha made their moves. Their movements were not quick, but every strike they made carried unopposable might that threatened to tear the world apart. It felt like the moon would crumble under their might and fall from the sky. After watching for a while, Zhong Xian finally understood why they had chosen this place for their final showdown. Neither of them is able to utilize the power of the heavens on the moon. As cultivators who controlled fragments of heavens, if they started using the powers of the heavens, it could worsen the stability of the world, causing countless people to die. As a result, they had decided to choose a battlefield where they had no choice but to rely on their own strength. The shockwaves were so powerful that they swept over thousands of li to reach Zhong Xian, but Little Chick fended them off right before they were about to reach him. Unfortunately for the moon, it did not have someone to protect it. Cracks appeared one after another on its surface, and it swiftly became tattered under the clashes of the two formidable powers. Zhong Xian was not able to see through their battles given the limitations of his current strength, and he could not use the Library of Heaven's path there either. So, he turned his sights to Little Chick and asked, "Who do you think will win?" Chapter 2232 I Shall Live as Myself. Instead of answering Zhong Xian's question, Little Chick frowned as he muttered with a hint of incredulity in his voice, "It's very weird." "What's weird?" Zhong Xian asked. "Since it is a life-and-death duel, I thought the two of them would give it their all, but for some reason." Little Chick cocked his head as he pondered over an incomprehensible question. Why does it seem like the two of them are still holding back? Are they sounding each other out to find an opportune moment to strike? Zhong Xian asked as he watched the duel worriedly. In most battles, the cultivators would not go all out and reveal their trump cards right from the start. Instead, they would try to sound out the other party's abilities to maximize the effectiveness of their trump cards. The ground continued wavering under the clashes of the two, and even the mountains that they had been standing on previously had been ground to dust. It was truly fortunate that they were not on the firmament, or else a battle of such scale would collapse even a city as massive as Drifting Spectre Royal City. Countless gods would surely have died in the catastrophe. Do you think that it's possible for you to stop them with your current strength? Zhong Xian asked. That's impossible, Little Chick replied with a shake of his head. My cultivation has grown a fair bit after my resurrection, but I'm still nowhere close to matching those two. Be it God Monarch Lingxi or the Heaven Subjugation Monarch, they are beings who have reached the zenith of the firmament. There is no God Monarch who could compete with them. Hearing those words, Zhong Xian sighed deeply. He had anticipated such an answer, but still, he could not help but feel deeply disappointed after hearing Little Chick's words. It seemed like there was really nothing he could do. Besides, even if Little Chick was able to stop the battle, it might just spell a great calamity in the near future. It would just be delaying the inevitable for a while longer. Hoo. A series of crescent arc surges of sword chi suddenly filled the surroundings. Luo Ruoxin had finally drawn her weapon. Her swordsmanship was extremely elegant and beautiful. It felt surprisingly familiar though, such that Zhong Xian could not help but frown after seeing it. It actually bore some resemblance to the swordsmanship that he had seen from the god monarch of the Sword Hut. However, the conceptualization was a little different. Luo Ruoxin's swordsmanship felt free and spirited, reminiscent of a person who was unbound by anything in the world. Ruoxin has probably received advice from the god monarch of the Sword Hut. He could not gauge just how powerful the god monarch of the Sword Hut was, but he had a feeling that the latter was someone who was comparable to Luo Ruoxin and Kongsha, especially since the latter was able to match him in a clash of equal power levels. Luo Ruoxin had taken the god monarch of the sword hut's swordsmanship and infused her soul into it, adapting it to become something that was hers. Taking a closer look, Zhongxian noticed that on top of the desire for freedom, Luo Ruoxin's swordsmanship carried the conceptualization of protection as well. The only problem was that these two concepts were at odds with one another. The desire of wanting to protect something was a shackle in itself, preventing one from living freely. If she was completely free, her swordsmanship would have been far stronger. He might be greatly lacking to them in terms of cultivation, but when it came to his eye for swordsmanship, he would not pale in comparison to them. The fact that he could comprehend a swordsmanship that surpassed the heavens spoke volumes. Luo Ruoxin's swordsmanship carried the desire to protect, but in the depths of her heart, what she truly craved was freedom. Even though she had already suppressed this contradiction to the bare minimum, it was inevitable that it would hinder her in a battle. It could very well become a fatal flaw of hers when fighting someone of the same level. If he could tell as much, Kongsha should be able to do so as well. With his heart thumping nervously, Zhongxian turned to look at Kongsha and saw the latter bringing out his weapon. It was a cane. Having seen through the flaws in the young lady's swordsmanship, Kongsha's cane struck furiously like a torrent, making it nigh impossible to defend against. His skills with the cane are truly formidable. Zhongxian was astounded. As the world's teacher, Kongsha was renowned not because of his superior strength but his deep comprehension of cultivation, the development of the system of master teachers, and the values that he passed down through the generations. As such, many people viewed him as a refined scholar. Zhongxian had thought that he would be refined even in a battle, but after seeing this, he realized that he could not have been more wrong. His cane lashed forth at his opponent with the might of an entire world, drawing upon might that none could withstand. It was utterly violent and destructive. This was at odds with his perception of whom Kongsha was. But again, how could a person destroy the otherworldly demonic tribe just by being refined? Having followed Kongsha's footsteps, he was aware of his deeds as he rose through the worlds. Kongsha was a person who desired to create an impartial world where everyone was strong and could stand up for themselves. In order to achieve his goals, it was inevitable that he would need to resort to violence at times. During Kongsha's era on the Master-Teacher continent, in order to ensure the survival of mankind, he had charged into the otherworldly demonic tribe alone and wreaked havoc in their midst, killing countless enemies. In the Azure, he had subdued many opponents in order to create and establish the ethereal hall system, allowing the world to rise to greater heights. There was no doubt that Kongsha was truly a terrifying individual, but his selflessness allowed him to earn the respect and not the fear of others. Terrifying toward those who stepped beyond his bottom line, magnanimous to all who sought to learn, it was no wonder he had been able to rise up as such a respected figure during an era of chaos, remembered by the world even after tens of thousands of years later. But again, this was yet another contradiction in itself, and this could be seen in his blows. Despite the violence of his cane, one could still feel his gentleness and merciful intent. His strikes appeared to carry the intent to kill, but he would alter them at the last moment in order to avoid landing a fatal blow. His principles disallowed him to kill a person who was innocent, putting him in a state of internal conflict. Zhongxian shook his head. This is a flaw as well. Luo Ruoxin craved freedom whereas Kongsha carried far too great compassion for the world. Those were huge taboos in a life-and-death duel. Yet, this was their very nature. It could not be changed so arbitrarily, especially not in the midst of a battle. What about me then? Seeing through the problems in the attacks of the two, Zhongxian could not help but reflect on himself. The pathos of heaven that he had comprehended carried great yearning toward his loved ones. As such, his swordsmanship was extremely binding and sentimental. However, after hearing the words from the god monarch of the sword hut, he had realized that there was a problem with his swordsmanship. There was nothing wrong with valuing one's sentiments, but it would be too shallow if that was all there was to it. Instead of wallowing in his feelings, he ought to use those sentiments as a driving force to protect his loved ones from danger. It was just like how love would not be enough to sustain a family. One would have to devote time and effort, not just mere sentiments, in order to protect one's family and sustain relations, be it financially or psychologically. If I were a god monarch, I would have been able to intervene and suggest solutions out of this quandary. I wouldn't have to helplessly watch as one of them pass away in this war of the heavens. If I had the power to protect the firmament, there would have been no need for them to do this. These thoughts surfaced in Zhong Xian's mind. It was a huge torture for him to see the two of them fighting one another. He would find it hard to accept the results no matter who won in the end. He regretted his own weakness. He could not even protect what he held dear to him. Zhong Xian sighed. I don't think I'm suited to protect at all. It was at this moment that he realized that he was not suited to the swordsmanship suggested by the god monarch of the sword hut. Having reincarnated from his previous world, there was one thing he realized. He did not like his fate being governed in the hands of another. Ever since his journey started on the master-teacher continent, he had always stood in the face of adversity without fear, pushing forward for what he believed in. He had also always wanted to protect those around him from harm, but not once had he ever thought of wanting to protect the entire world. What he wanted was not to protect others but to live the way he wanted. Chapter 2233 The Demise of a Monarch. To him, living as himself meant becoming the best him. In his journey, while his clone had been thinking of ways in which he could brag, such a thought had never crossed his mind. There were one or two occasions when he had taken center stage of his own volition, but that was also in order to become the best him. In the depths of his heart, he had always been a humble, low-profile, diligent, and honest person. As such a thought arose in his mind, he felt like his heart had suddenly opened up. At the same time, the sword art that he had comprehended began to change. His sword arts, be it a heart of intertwined threads or unyielding loyalty, carried the conceptualization of binding something, but along with the change in his state of mind, they became haughtier and more refined, carrying the will to charge ahead fearlessly. He would do anything to protect his kin and loved ones, but he would never allow himself to become their slaves. In the same way, it was right for a person to earn money in order to support their family, but they must not allow it to become their only reason for existence. That would be merely living for the sake of living. To charge bravely ahead and become the best him, that was the path he had chosen. If he could become the best him and obtain the strength and capabilities he desired, he would also gain the strength to protect those who were dear to him. These two notions were not at odds with one another. As the contradictions in his heart cleared away, Zhong Xian continued to observe the battle ahead of him. The clash between the two most powerful experts in the firmament had made the spectating experts utterly silent. None of them were able to say a word. He is really formidable, Little Chick murmured in disbelief. In just 40 years, he was able to reinforce his cultivation to such an extent. The Heaven Subjugation Monarch is really an incredible genius. The Deathless Monarch had lived for many years, and he had even resurrected once. Yet, he came nowhere close in comparison to the prowess of the Heaven Subjugation Monarch. This was more than enough to highlight the difference in terms of talent between the two of them. It was to such an extent that one could not help but despair. After lamenting, Little Chick turned to look at the young man beside him, and he shook his head once more. If he thought about it, the young master's talents did not pale anywhere in comparison to the Heaven Subjugation Monarch. In fact, if they really had to make a comparison, it felt like the young master had an edge over the latter. The young master might just reach the same level as those two within the next decade or so. Luo Ruoxin retracted her sword and took a few steps back before speaking with a cold voice. Impressive. You were able to become this powerful within a short 40 years. However, I still have one last move. If you are able to overcome it, it'll be my loss. I also have one last move prepared, Kongsha replied with his usual composure. If I lose, I hope that you can respect our previous agreement. I'm not a person who would go against my words, Luo Ruoxin replied. I also hope that you can keep to our agreement if I lose my life. Of course, Kongsha nodded. Let's not waste any time then. Having come to a decision, the two of them made their moves simultaneously. An incomparably powerful sword intent burst into the air while a cane smashed downward with unfathomable might. The clash between the two created such blinding radiance that it outshone the glow of the moon. For a moment, The entire firmament was blinded by the light in the clash. What's that? I have no idea. Is it the fight between the god monarch of the sky of freedom and the heaven subjugation monarch? They are fighting on the moon. It must be. Who else could create such a huge commotion? At the same time, countless people in the firmament raised their heads to look at the moon, which appeared to be almost as brilliant as the sun. Amid the blinding light, Kongsha's cane seemed to forge a long river of time in front of him. Countless silhouettes could be seen drifting within the river, encompassing the history of the world since tens of thousands of years ago. Each of these snapshots of history had a Kongsha in them. Some of them were furious, some of them had a gentle smile, some of them were cheerful, and some of them were sorrowful. Put together, these Kongshas seemed to drive the wheels of history, bringing the true powers of the temporal laws into life. This was his strongest technique: spring and autumn, a brush to dictate spring, and a brush to dictate autumn. It was a technique that tapped into everything from the past to the present. The wills of these Kongshas that existed across the time continuum aligned together with one another, bestowing him with strength far beyond anyone's imagination. It felt like the entire moon would collapse under the sheer pressure of his strength and fall to the ground. Under the rush of history, the grey granite on the moon flashed white before shattering into dust. There was no one, no matter how strong, who could oppose the might of time. It was a transcendental power that formed the basis of the universe. Ruoxin. Zhongxian did not think that Kongsha would actually have such a move up his sleeves, and he could not help but place his hands together out of sheer nervousness. Looking anxiously at the young lady, for a brief moment, he saw her glancing at him yearningly. But the next moment, she was already looking at her opponent with eyes filled with regality. I have been waiting for this. She raised her sword and pierced it right toward the river of time. The sword froze on the spot, as if it was destined to never reach its target. Yet, the sword intent bursting forth from it struck through the river of time and pierced through history. Unlike the three-dimensional nature of space, the flow of time was one-dimensional. It was incapable of changing its flow and dodging Luo Ruoxin's attack. Her sword was directed right at the weakness of spring and autumn, piercing through the countless Kongshas at once, leaving him unable to dodge. In the end, the past was nothing more than the past. It did not have the power to dictate the present and the future. It's the great codex of spring and autumn. She obtained it in the master-teacher continent and uncovered all of its secrets, Zhongxian muttered with a slightly pale face. It was apparent that the sword art was created with the sole purpose of dealing with Kongsha. Using her as the medium, she channeled her sword intent toward the temporal laws to pierce through the flow of time. There was no way she would have been able to create such a move without comprehending the secrets of the great codex of spring and autumn. And he was the one who entered the temple of Confucius and obtained the great codex of spring and autumn for her. If Kongsha was killed, he would be an accomplice. He turned to look at Kongsha, hoping that he would be able to avoid or overcome this attack somehow. Yet, instead of retaliating, he placed the cane in his hand down. Why? Zhongxian shouted. In that instant, he dashed forward, wanting to shake Kongsha to his senses, but little Chick resolutely held him back. That technique causes his present self to overlap with his other selves in history. If his other selves are killed, his present self won't be able to survive. That is the greatest flaw of this technique, so there's nothing he could do to save himself, little Chick explained with a shake of his head. But there must be some way. Some way. Zhongxian exclaimed in despair. Deep inside, he knew that little Chick was right. Time worked in a straight line. If the past him was killed, the present him could not possibly survive. Spring and autumn was indeed a powerful technique, but it had a terribly dangerous flaw to it. Don't forget what you have promised me. Kongsha shot a glance at Zhongxian, and his voice echoed within his ears. Then, his body began falling to the ground. Boom. Under the powerful surge of sword intent from Luo Ruoxin, the river of time was severed, and the silhouettes in there dissipated one after another. Before the present Kongsha could reach the ground, his body had already disintegrated into a mist that carried the powers of the heavens. The mist immediately dashed into the sky, wanting to escape from the moon. However, Luo Ruoxin swiftly reached out and grabbed the mist tightly, preventing it from escaping. Hong long long. All of this happened in an instant, and the brilliant light on the moon swiftly disappeared. However, the violent energies that were caused by the clash continued to linger in the surroundings. They gathered together in the sky and fell to the ground as a heavy downpour. It was as if the sky itself was crying. The duel between the two god monarchs had ended. Kongsha was dead. Chapter 2234 Conferred God King of the Nine Skies. 1. Grasping tightly at the mist that had come from Kongsha's body, Luo Ruoxin was in a daze. The heaven subjugation monarch had awed many people ever since his arrival in the firmament. Even the god monarchs had ended up submitting to him one after another. Luo Ruoxin had walked into the battle with the resolve that she could possibly lose her life, but in the end, she was the one who had survived. That had been Kongsha's most powerful technique. Even though she had traveled to the lower worlds to figure out his abilities and spent a great deal of time trying to devise a counter for it, everything had happened so smoothly that she could not help feeling a little dazed. It almost felt as if Kongsha had given up on the battle at the last moment. When she executed her very last strike, for a split second, she could see relief on Kongsha's face, as if he had finally fulfilled what he had set out to do. After a moment of silence, Luo Ruoxin collected the mist with a flick of her finger before heaving a sigh of relief. Then, she turned her sight toward a certain someone not too far away. The young man whom she loved dearly was dashing toward the area where Kongsha had fallen. He desperately tried to retain the remnants of Kongsha's energy, but his efforts were futile. Knowing Zhongshen's feelings, Luo Ruoxin hesitated for a moment before walking toward him and saying, "This is fate. There's nothing we can do about it." Those who possessed a fragment of the heavens carried a fate that they could not escape from. Zhongshen lowered his head for a long while before he quietly replied, "I understand." He did not want to accept it, but it was a fact that Kongsha was really dead. Ever since his time on the Master-Teacher continent, Kongsha had served as a guide to him, shining light on the path that he should take. While he had never formally acknowledged the other party as his teacher, he viewed the other party as his mentor and respected him deeply. He did not think that the other party would vanish from the face of the world shortly after their first meeting. He could clearly remember his interactions with the old man, as if the latter was still with him. It felt unreal that he had passed away just like that. Is this the path that we have to take as well? Will we have to fight it out to vie for the heavens too? Zhongshen looked at Luo Ruoxin with a sorrowful look on his face. "I don't know." Luo Ruoxin lowered her face, as if trying to escape Zhongshen's eyes. "You already have an answer deep inside your heart. You are just unwilling to say it out loud. Did you avoid me all this time to avoid getting entangled with me? Are you afraid that you won't be able to make a move on me at the very end?" Zhongshen asked. Luo Ruoxin could not answer his question. Seeing this, Zhongshen felt as if his heart had shattered apart. He suddenly felt like he had to get out of here. He turned around and walked away. "Little chick, let's go." If it was fate that one of them had to die at the hands of the other, he would have preferred this ill-fated romance between them to have never begun in the first place. Zhongshen. Watching his departing back, Luo Ruoxin closed her eyes, and when she finally opened them once more, her vision was already blurry. With a quivering voice, she said, "I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize to me. This is simply our fate," Zhongshen replied without turning around. He had persevered all this while in the hopes that he would be able to see her once more. But when he finally met her once more and understood the truth behind everything, perhaps it would have been better if he had let her go right from the start. He could not accept that this was the only future that lay ahead of the two of them. If this was the suffering that he had to go through, he would rather not have any emotions. A mouthful of blood spurted from Zhongshen's mouth as his vision darkened a little. As someone who cultivated the pathos of heaven, the desire of wanting to be emotionless was a fatal blow to him. Just the mere thought of it nearly caused his cultivation to collapse. Wang. The pendant hanging in around him heated up. A surge of energy flowed into his body and suppressed the chaotic flow of energy within his body. Zhongshen raised his hand to grab the pendant around his neck. He wanted to throw it back to Luo Ruoxin, But at the very last moment, he released his grip, and his hand slackened by his side. There was no use venting his anger on Luo Ruoxin. It was not her fault that everything had turned out like that. If she had died in the duel, he would have surely reacted many times worse than he currently was. From the very start, only one person was going to walk out of the duel alive. It was just that he simply refused to acknowledge this reality. He slowly turned around to face Luo Ruoxin, only to see that her eyes had reddened completely. In that moment, Zhongxian suddenly felt deeply apologetic. All this while, she had been forced to live with the knowledge that such a future lay ahead of them. He could not begin to imagine just how much pressure she must have been under. The pain that she felt was definitely no less than his. So, he walked over and embraced her tightly. With a determined voice, he said, "I don't believe that there's no way around the war of the heavens. I'll definitely find a way for the both of us to survive this, so wait for me." All of a sudden, he recalled the words that Kongsha had said. The latter had mentioned that he had been thinking about this matter all these years, and he had an idea in mind. It was just that he was not certain whether he would succeed. This meant that they were not completely helpless. There were ways in which they could circumvent this. They just had to find it. Putting everything aside, during his time in the Azure, Kongsha's clone seemed to know of a way to extract the Library of Heaven's path from his body. Though the method would result in his death, was it possible for them to modify it in some way so that he could survive even after extracting the Library of Heaven's path? If they could do it, they would be able to overcome this darned war of the heavens without the sacrifice of either one of them. Is that possible? Luo Ruoxin asked weakly. Yes, it is possible. It must be possible. I'll definitely find a way out of this, so trust me, Zhongxian said. But what if you can't find it? Luo Ruoxin's voice quivered a little. With a firm and resolute tone, Zhongxian replied, "At the very most, we'll just die together. Once we are gone, the fragments of the heavens will come together to repair the firmament, but that will already be none of our business." This. Hearing Zhongxian's words, Luo Ruoxin was taken aback for a moment before she nodded resolutely. "You're right. Why should we care that much after we're dead? We'll just be together under the same tombstone. Indeed, what's the worst that could happen? Be it the heavens or fate, nothing will tear us apart anymore. Nothing will tear us apart anymore." With reddened eyes, Luo Ruoxin also embraced the young man tightly. She had been hesitating and worrying all this time. She knew that it was an impossible love, but she simply could not harden her will to forsake it. But the young man voiced her deepest wishes. As long as they were together, death was nothing to fear. Having cast aside all her hesitation, there was nothing holding her back. "Even if the heavens collapse, I'll be satisfied as long as I'm with you." Feeling the warmth from the young lady's body, a poem suddenly surfaced in Zhongxian's mind. "A pair of lovebirds we shall be in the heavens, a pair of branches we intertwine on earth. Even the heavens and earth are limited by time, but our feelings shall be eternal." At the same time, the Library of Heaven's path jolted, and a cultivation technique manual materialized. What is there to rejoice about life? What is there to grief about death? The seas can dry up, and the stones can be ground down, but even if the world were to be obliterated, our feelings will last through time. Boom. Above the moon, a great surge of energy rained down upon Zhongxian, shrouding him within a surge of energy. At the same time, red clouds began to congregate around the firmament, and a massive power poured down. Dark shadows filled the land, and the earth began to tremor. It seemed like something was going to be born. Zhongxian had thought that unless he received a conferment from a god monarch, he would not be able to overcome his limits as a god king. Yet, who could have known that he would still be able to tear through the bottleneck ahead of him without any problems? The eyes of the god monarchs widened in shock at that sight. Fairy Linglong's body trembled as she exclaimed, "Instead of being conferred by a god monarch, he is being conferred by the world itself. This is the world conferment. Does this mean that there will be yet another heaven subjugation monarch?" The god monarchs present in the area turned to look at Zhongxian with flabbergasted expressions, and they were not able to speak for a very long time. Chapter 2235 Conferred God King of the Nine Skies 2:40 years ago, a talented genius possessing superior talent had suddenly appeared in the firmament. Impressed with his talent, the god monarchs had sought to take him under their wing and confer him as their conferred god king. A huge fight had broken out among them as a result of that. At the end of the fight, they had come to an agreement. In order to avoid escalating the conflict, none of them would confer him. Everyone had thought that this would be the end for that talented genius. No one could have imagined that the talented genius would end up receiving the conferment of the world itself. It had been the same sight back then. The entire firmament was wrapped within red clouds, and a grand power rose from the world. The god monarchs had all been taken aback by the phenomenon the first time they witnessed it, as they realized that something greater than them was occurring. And just as they thought, the talented genius had eventually grown to become the heaven subjugation monarch, wielding the powers to challenge even the great god monarch Lingxi. 40 years later, the heaven subjugation monarch fell in a grand showdown with the god monarch Lingxi, but moments later, yet another person conferred by the world appeared. Not even the 9 god monarchs had enjoyed such an honor during their ascension. The world conferment was a natural force of the world that was beyond the control of the god monarchs, and one who had been bestowed with such power would be truly invincible beneath the god monarchs. Is this fate, too? Little Chick murmured. He had thought that the young master would require several years of accumulation to reach such a level, but he had managed to pull it off in the blink of an eye. It was insane. While muttering to himself in shock, Little Chick nearly lost control of his powers and reverted to a little chick. The Cloud Dragon Monarch also had his eyes widened into large bells, and it looked as if he was on the verge of reverting to his dragon form. Fairy Linglong was trembling in so much fear that her legs were clamped tightly together. Just thinking about how she had attempted to kill the young man previously was enough to make her blood run cold. As powerful as they were only bestowed with the powers to govern a single sky. However, the young man before them had been recognized by all of the 9 skies. In other words, he was the conferred king of the 9 skies. This marked the start of yet another legend. Jia. In the firmament, the doors of a humble-looking straw hut opened, and a young man walked out. He gazed at the sky silently, but vaguely, one could see the corners of his lips edging up to form a slight smile. He has comprehended it far faster than I thought. Perhaps you were right all along. I'll be waiting for him to create a miracle. In the sky of drifting specters, Chi Meng walked out from his seclusion to gaze at the red clouds in the sky. Conferred king of the 9 skies. Who could it be? As the conferred god king of the Chi clan, he was aware of how the heaven subjugation monarch had risen to power back then, and he knew about the conferred king of the 9 skies as well. However, he could not fathom who had sparked such a grand phenomenon this time. It seems like it's the rise of yet another heaven subjugation monarch. What a pity that we weren't able to get acquainted with him in advance. Otherwise, it would have guaranteed our Chi clan's prosperity for years to come, Chi Meng muttered. The world seemed to obey a certain cycle, but the closer they came to uncovering the secrets of the world, the more erratic they found the world to be. Even with the wisdom they had accrued over thousands of years, they were unable to fathom the world's trajectory. If he had known whom the conferred king of the 9 skies was, he would have gotten acquainted with the other party in advance. That would surely have been a blessing for their Chi clan. But there was simply no way to predict such a thing. Not even the god monarchs had the ability to do so, let alone a mere conferred god king. I wonder who it is. Chi Meng thought of all the cultivators who were on the verge of reaching God King realm pinnacle in his head, but there were none that seemed to fit the criteria. It looks like this God King has been maintaining quite a low profile, or else there's no way I wouldn't have been able to guess it. The conferred God King of the 9 skies was bound to be someone who possessed incomparable talent, so it should have been easy for him to guess who it was. Yet, he was simply unable to figure the identity of the person. It could only go to say that this God King was an incredibly humble and low-profile individual. How rare. There were not many low-profile individuals in the firmament anymore. Someone has managed to become a conferred God King of the 9 skies, just like our teacher. On the cliff where Kongsha resided, ancient sage Zi Yuan looked at the energy gathering in the sky with a solemn look on his face. It must be Zhongshe. For Zhongshe to receive the world conferment, doesn't that mean that our teacher? Something must have happened to our teacher. Sigh. Our teacher told us to view Zhongshen as our leader and wait. I believe that he has his reasons for instructing us to do so. Let's believe in our teacher and await his return. Nothing can happen to you, teacher. The crowd fell silent. For some reason, to them, it felt like the world conferment marked the end of their teacher's legend and the start of Zhongshe's legend. Hoo-ha, hoo-ha. Panting heavily, a young man dodged the attack of a rabbit and successfully escaped to a nearby cavern. Within the cavern, two beautiful ladies looked at him anxiously as they asked, "How is it?" If Zhongshen was there, he would have recognized these two ladies as Yu Fei and Hu Yaro, whom he had met in the Azure not too long ago. And the young man, naturally, was Luo Chich's elder brother, Luo Shenqing. Having entered the firmament through the Hall of Gods, they found themselves on the Grand Spirit Mountain, similar to Zhongshen and his direct disciples. Due to having swallowed Zhongshen's blood, they had overcome the spatial turbulence without sustaining too many injuries, and they had been able to quickly recover from their injuries too. Nevertheless, with their God Realm primary stage cultivation, they were not able to easily deal with the threats lurking all around the firmament. I couldn't beat the rabbit, and I nearly got killed by it. It's lucky that I ran away fast enough. However, it seems like we'll have to starve for tonight as well. Luo Shenqing shook his head bitterly. They had thought that the firmament would be filled with spiritual energy and all sorts of treasures, but never in their wildest dreams would they have imagined that it was actually this barren. Despite being the strongest experts in the Azure, they did not even have the strength to deal with a mere rabbit. Just the thought of it left them feeling deeply stifled. The flow of time in the firmament is so slow, and the spatial pressure is far too great. Without adapting to such an environment, it would be hard for one to even walk around. Hu Yaro could not help but ask, "Say, how do you think Zhongshen managed to break the dimension barrier to return to the Azure? How strong must he be in order to do that?" The remaining two people fell silent. They had expected the firmament to be just a little more formidable than the Azure, but the gap between the two worlds was truly enormous. With the sheer resilience of the spatial laws there, they could not imagine how Zhongshen could have torn open the dimension barrier to deliver the god blood to them. Just how powerful was he? When I headed out earlier, I encountered a few students who are out for an expedition, Luo Shenqing said. According to what I heard, it seems like the cultivation realms in the firmament are divided into God, Celestial God, God King, Conferred God King, and God Monarch. It has only been a month since he arrived at the firmament, and taking into account his talent and speed of cultivation, I reckon that he should be a middle-tier god at the moment. As for returning to the Azure, I seriously doubt that. After all, he didn't appear before us at all. My guess is that he might have sent the god blood down through some sort of ritual. It shouldn't be too difficult to do so with the powers of Starchaser Palace's altar. Through eavesdropping on the conversation of the cultivators he had met earlier today, he had gained some understanding of the firmament, and he knew how difficult it was to raise one's cultivation there. Hu Yaro pondered for a moment before shaking her head. That fellow has always been good at achieving the impossible. I think his cultivation should be higher than that. Around high-tier god, I'd say. You're saying that his cultivation has leaped across 2 realms within a month? Luo Shenqing snorted in disbelief. You are thinking too highly of him. It is extremely difficult to do so, but I believe that he's capable of it. Yu Fei chirped in enthusiastically. Perhaps. Knowing that it was impossible to argue with these two fangirls, Luo Shenqing shrugged before falling silent. At this moment, the ground beneath them suddenly began to tremor, so the 3 of them quickly charged out of the cavern, only see with a sky filled with red clouds. What is that? Is this some kind of skill cast by a god monarch? It feels like the world's acknowledgement toward an individual to me. I felt the same way back when Zhongshen was acknowledged as a celestial master teacher. I didn't think that I would witness such a sight shortly after arriving in the firmament. All right then, from today on, I shall view that expert as my idol, Luo Shenqing declared with eyes filled with passion. I shall view him as my target, and I shall rise through the ranks and surpass that darned lad Zhongshen. Chapter 2236 Kong Shi could come back to life. In the Sanctum of Sages, Luo Xianqing had met Zhong Xian for the first time, and they had become close friends with one another. However, due to the matter concerning his younger sister, they had ended up turning against one another. But in the depths of his heart, he still viewed the other party to be his rival and a friend. It was just that the other party's cultivation grew too quickly. He made breakthroughs so frighteningly quick, leaving innumerable legends in his wake. He had thought that it would have been impossible for him to catch up with Zhong Xian, but who could have known that there would be such a huge time gap between the master-teacher continent and the higher worlds? With this, he still had a chance. At this moment, Zhong Xian only had a month's advantage on him. As long as he worked diligently, he should be able to catch up with the other party, and soon, he would be able to give the other party a good pummeling. Surpass Zhong Xian? Hearing Luo Xuanqing's muttering, Hu Yarou and Yu Fei glanced at one another before shaking their heads helplessly. Forget it, do whatever that makes you happy. As people who had seen how Zhong Xian forged his legend, they did not think that Luo Xianqing stood a chance at all. But that being said, if Zhong Xian was really only at high-tier god at the moment, they might still be able to catch up to him and advance alongside him. This thought filled them up with great drive. How beautiful it is. I reckon that the person who has been acknowledged by the world must be a great person as well. The two young ladies spoke as they stared at the red sky as well. Paying no heed to the shocked gazes of the god monarchs, Zhong Xian closed his eyes as he perceived the changes that were occurring within his body. Conferred God King Realm Primary Stage. Conferred God King Realm Intermediate Stage. Conferred God King Realm Pinnacle. In less than a minute, his soul cultivation had already risen from God King Realm Pinnacle to Conferred God King Realm Pinnacle. But his soul cultivation did not stop there. It continued rising beyond that point. Just the conferment of the world was enough for him to raise his soul cultivation several stages. This was even more terrifying than the anima of yearning. However, this isn't a good time for me to push for a breakthrough to God Monarch, Zhong Xian thought as he suppressed his rising soul cultivation. Conferred God King of the Nine Skies was equivalent to receiving the conferment of the Nine Skies simultaneously, granting him far greater powers than other conferred God Kings. Under normal circumstances, such power should have been enough for him to become a God Monarch, but it was a pity that his physical body and Zhenqi cultivation was still too weak. If he made a breakthrough then, he would induce the monarch heavenly tribulation, but he was not ready to face this cultivation ordeal yet. Without a doubt, he would be crushed. If that happened, he would become the first god monarch in history who died from a cultivation ordeal right after his breakthrough. How embarrassing would that be? For that reason, he decisively suppressed the further growth of his soul cultivation. In any case, he had already comprehended the god monarch realm cultivation technique that he required for his breakthrough. It would not be too late to make a breakthrough after he raised his physical body and Zhenqi cultivation. That is a wise decision. Luo Ruoxin heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing how Zhong Xian was able to remain rational even in the face of such great temptation. When it came to cultivation, it was not about making a breakthrough as quickly as possible. Instead, what was more important was building a strong foundation, and only then would a cultivator be able to exert greater strength after their breakthrough. The person whom she fancied was indeed a person with great willpower and decisiveness. After stabilizing the energies within his body, Zhong Xian exhaled deeply before turning to look at the young lady beside him. I intend to find a way to circumvent the war of the heavens. Do you want to stay with me, or? It had not been easy for him to reunite with her once more, so he did not want to part with her so quickly. However, there was no guarantee that he would be able to find a solution, and staying together could just lead to greater pain in the future. He did not want to force her for his own selfishness. I need to return to the sky of freedom for a while to settle some matters. After I'm done, I'll head over to see you. Luo Ruoxin replied. There were some things that she had to settle right away. All right, I'll be waiting for you. Zhong Xian nodded. Then, he beckoned Little Chick over and said, let's go. UN. Little Chick nodded. With a wave of his hand, the two of them vanished on the spot. Luo Ruoxin stood quietly for a moment before leaving the area. Just like that, the other god monarchs quickly dispersed. Everything that had just happened a moment ago left them feeling a little shaken. Be it the grand battle they had just witnessed or the upcoming birth of a new god monarch, it seemed like the firmament would soon be undergoing massive changes. And what had left them even more worried was that the upcoming god monarch already held unprecedented power. Even before making a breakthrough himself, god monarch Lingxi was his girlfriend, and the deathless monarch was his tamed beast. How were they supposed to deal with such an overpowered character? Zhongxian returned to the mountain where Kongshe and his direct disciples resided. Zhongshe, ancient sage Zi Yuan and the others quickly gathered around the area. Kongshe, he has. Zhongxian began speaking with a solemn voice. It's fine. We already know, ancient sage Zi Yuan replied with a deep sigh. Earlier, when our teacher's sculpture broke apart, we already knew that our teacher's soul has dissipated. My condolences. Zhongxian knew of the deep bond between Kongshe and his direct disciples. After having been together for so many years, the feelings they had with one another had probably transcended even that of kinship. There's nothing to grieve over. Our teacher wouldn't leave us just like that, ancient sage Zi Yuan replied. Zhongxian was slightly surprised to hear those words. I saw his soul dissipating with my own eyes. I fear that the possibility of him returning is extremely slim. A cultivator who had lost their body could still find another body to house their soul, but if a cultivator's soul dissipated, that would really be the end of them. Yet, ancient sage Zi Yuan and the others seemed to be holding on to the hope that Kongshe might still return somehow. In the firmament, death doesn't necessarily represent the end. Doesn't the netherworld pool of the sky of drifting spectre hold the power to revive souls that have dissipated? Besides, the deathless monarch died decades ago, but he has also returned from his death, isn't that so? Ancient sage Zi Yuan said. This. Zhongxian's body shuddered a little. Indeed. The netherworld pool had the ability to restore a dissipated soul through the anima of yearning, and the deathless monarch had the ability to resurrect from death. For someone like Kongshe who possessed capabilities unmatched by anyone before him, how could he possibly not have a backup plan? He might have already found a way to come back to life. Just that. Even if he comes back to life, will he still be the same person as he was? Zhongxian asked contemplatively. The deathless monarch might have resurrected from death, but he had ended up becoming Little Chick. Even though they shared the same memories, they were no longer the same person. The same went for the netherworld pool. There was no guarantee that the restored soul would possess the same consciousness as before. He will be, ancient sage Zi Yuan replied affirmatively. How can you be so certain about it? Zhongxian asked with a frown. It was clear that ancient sage Zi Yuan knew something about this, or else he would not have reacted in such a manner. God monarch, can you cast an isolation barrier over this house so as to prevent the will of the heavens from peering in? Ancient sage Zi Yuan asked. Very well. Little Chick nodded. He waved his hand and shrouded the house with his powers, isolating it from the rest of the world. After that, ancient sage Zi Yuan turned to look at Zhongxian. Understanding ancient sage Zi Yuan's intention, Zhongxian said with a nod, I'll give it a try. It was not enough just to isolate the house from the heavens because Zhongxian possessed a fragment of the heavens inside him as well. Where the library of heaven's path was, the heavens would be able to reach. This was shown by how the heavens had wrecked the Seer Guild back then despite the measures they had put in place. Zhongxian channeled his soul energy and wrapped it around his library of heaven's path, sealing it off. Such a thing would have been impossible in the past, but now that he had comprehended a god-monarch realm cultivation technique, it was well within his means to do so. All right, it's done, Zhongxian said. Seeing that everything was in place, ancient sage Zi Yuan looked at Zhongxian intently before asking, Zhongshe, have you ever heard about our teacher cultivating a technique known as severing the three necrophoros? Chapter 2237 Kongshe's Plan. Zhongxian shook his head and replied, I've never heard of it before. You've never heard of it before? Ancient sage Zi Yuan was slightly surprised to hear that answer. With a slight frown, he asked, Zhongshe, you met our teacher's clone in the Azure, right? Do you notice any difference between our teacher and his clone? Difference. Zhongxian pondered for a moment before replying. To be honest, at the very start, I was unable to discern any difference at all, be it in terms of his body or soul. I would say that the greatest difference between the two of them is their personality. It was not without reason that he had been fooled by Kong Shi's clone back then. If not for the other party's attempts to kill him, he might have been fooled by the other party's facade. Humans are born with turbidity inside of them. They undergo birth, aging, illness, death, and all sorts of suffering. This leads to desire, envy, lust, greed, and all sorts of emotions consuming their mind, leading them to be fixated with inconsequential things, ancient sage Zi Yuan explained. Zhongxian nodded in agreement. There was no human who was devoid of desire. Even the most selfless of saints would find it hard to transcend their desires. Zhongxian was filled with many desires as well. He desired to love and to be loved, he desired to be understood, he desired to eat delicious food, he desired to be strong. These were powerful desires that drove him. Severing the three necrophoros is a technique that severs one's unnecessary fixations and malevolent intent, thus returning purity to one's mind and body, ancient sage Zi Yuan replied. Hearing those words, Zhongxian's body stiffened up a little. Was that for real? If this was true, the technique would really be frighteningly formidable. We have practiced the technique as well. Back when we were on the Master-Teacher continent, we severed our three necrophoros and used them to seal off the passageway between the Azure and the Master-Teacher continent, ancient sage Zi Yuan replied. I see. So those were your necrophoros? Zhongxian nodded in realization. He had wondered how they were all still around despite having seen their corpses back on the Master-Teacher continent. It turned out to be a side effect of a technique that they had been practicing. The necrophoros that was severed from one's body would appear to be no different from one's real body, such that it was nigh impossible to tell the difference. The similarity was so great that it could fool even the heavens. Indeed. Back while he was on the Master-Teacher continent, our teacher severed his benevolent necrophoros and forged it into the great codex of spring and autumn. In the Azure, he severed his malevolent necrophoros and sealed it in the ethereal hall, which turned into the clone that you met. If I'm not mistaken, he used the hands of god Monarch Lingxi to sever his ego necrophoros, ancient sage Zi Yuan explained. Benevolent necrophoros, malevolent necrophoros, and ego necrophoros? Only through severing persisting thoughts of good and evil and overcoming one's sense of self will one be able to transcend one's fixations, ancient sage Zi Yuan explained. Our teacher was born with a fragment of the heavens within him, and every time he used it, a sliver of grey energy would be left within his body. This grey energy was fused together with his body and his soul, making it impossible to remove it. So, he devised the technique, severing the three necrophoros, in order to free himself of the grey energy in order to achieve true liberation. I see. Zhongxian nodded in realization. That would explain why Kong Shi had been able to remain composed right from the start. It seemed like everything, from the start of the battle to his resignation in the end, had gone according to his plan. Through using Luo Ruoxin's strength to sever his ego necrophoros, he would be giving up on everything that he had been persistently holding on to thus far. As a result, he would be freed from the mark that the heavens had left on him, allowing him to achieve true transcendence. As expected of the world's teacher, he was decisive in his actions, and he had everything in his grasp. Zhongxian looked at his own body and saw that the grey energy within his body had grown quite a bit. It was lodged deep within his body and soul, making it impossible to remove it. Even with his pathos of heaven, he was unable to do anything about the grey energy within him. In order to successfully sever the three necrophoros, one has to fool the heavens first. As such, other than our teachers and a few of us, there is practically no one who knows of this technique. Our teacher has also never imparted it to anyone else. Furthermore, once this technique has been used, the heavens will automatically repair the flaws accordingly, making it impossible to use it a second time. It's probably for this reason that our teacher didn't impart it to you, ancient sage Zi Yuan explained. Zhongxian nodded in response. As someone who possessed a fragment of the heavens as well, he could understand that much. In order to be freed from the shackles of the heavens, one would have to first learn how to fool the heavens. Zhongxian would eventually have to find a way to free himself from the shackles of the heavens as well, but Kongshi's method would not work for him. After all, after the precedents from Kongshi, the heavens would surely be guarded against it a second time. If he dared attempt it, he might just end up being obliterated by the heavens in the process of doing so. Zhongshi, our teacher has discussed your matters with us before. He says that just like him, you have to find a way to transcend the heavens. Even though it is a different route from what he took, it seems like both he and God Monarch Lingxi have already prepared a way out for you, ancient sage Zi Yuan said. Prepared a way out for me? Zhongxian was astonished. This was the first he had heard about this. Our teacher didn't tell us what God Monarch Lingxi's plan is, but I do know about what our teacher has left for you. For one, the Deathless Monarch is something our teacher prepared specifically for you, ancient sage Zi Yuan said. This. Zhongxian was stunned. He had thought about this before. If Little Chick had descended to the Master-Teacher continent together with the otherworldly demons after his demise, he would have been in the otherworldly battlefield instead of being on a mountain range on the Master-Teacher continent. And it seemed like he was right after all. It was an intentional move on Kongshi's part, but he did not realize that the latter had prepared it for him. Thinking deeper into the matter, a unique trait of Little Chick was his ability to resurrect from death. After absorbing his blood at the lucid lunar lake, he had gained a portion of his resurrection ability as well. If he lost his life somehow, there was a chance that he might be able to come back to life after the passing of innumerable years. Just that. So what if he came back to life? There was a good chance that another consciousness would arise out of him, and he would become another person altogether. Putting everything aside, even though his clone originated from the same soul as him, his clone was a compulsive braggart, very different from the humble and low-profile person he was. In other words, just because two beings originated from the same soul did not mean that they were identical existences. Their consciousness could vastly differ from one another, making them distinct individuals. The hand that Kongsha had left behind only guaranteed his return to life, but it was not enough to preserve his consciousness. If that was the case, what was the hand that Luo Ruoxin had prepared for him? Zhongxian could not help but fall into deep thought. Two objects surfaced in his mind. First, the disguise amulet that allowed him to alter even his bloodline. It was an artifact that was more formidable than he had initially thought. It could actually fool even conferred god kings. However, it did not seem to have anything that had to do with the heavens. Is it the crimson pendant then? There was a droplet of blood within the pendant that carried powers that he could not comprehend. This pendant had proven to have the ability to restore composure into his consciousness whenever his mind fell into disarray. The first time it happened was when he suddenly realized that the Heaven's Path divine art was not as perfect as he thought after entering the Azure. That had nearly caused his cultivation to go berserk, but the pendant had managed to calm down the chaos within him. The second time was when he doubted the existence of the pathos of heaven a moment ago. Both times, it had shaken his consciousness awake during a critical moment. Given so, was it possible that it had the ability to retain his consciousness even after he resurrected from death? But that did not make sense either. Luo Ruoxin was the one who had given him this pendant, so if she already knew this much, what was she still worried about? If they could both survive the war of the heavens through such a method, everything was good, was it not? Chapter 2238 The Origin of Larusha : I guess I can only ask her directly. Zhongxian shook his head. On the surface, the strongest expert in the firmament appeared to be none other than Luo Ruoxin. Yet, for some reason, he felt like they were being pushed forward by a pair of invisible hands, shoving them inside a vortex of turmoil. Is it possible for you to impart the severing of 3 necrophorus to me? Zhongxian asked. Regardless of whether he could free himself from the restraints of the heavens, this technique would still grant him 3 additional lives, thus providing him with far greater means to protect himself. Furthermore, he could also sever his benevolent necrophorus, malevolent necrophorus, and ego necrophorus. That would make it easier for him to cultivate in the future. In order to deceive the heavens, It was important that we did not retain memories of it in our head. Otherwise, the heavens would still be able to peer through it. We learned and cultivated the technique in the spatial turbulence while we were leaving the master-teacher continent, and after we were done with it, we erased it from our memories. Not even our teacher retained it in his mind, so I'm afraid that we don't have it with us, ancient sage Zi Yuan said with an awkward smile. Hearing those words, Zhongxian shook his head and sighed deeply. He suddenly thought of something and asked, "This technique was created by Kongsha, right? But doesn't that mean that he knew that there would be others who would compete with him over the fragments of the heavens?" This was something that really intrigued him. Even as he left the master-teacher continent, he had still known almost nothing about the fragments of the heavens and the War of the Heavens. He had still been very reliant on the library of Heaven's Path. Everything should only come together after they reached the firmament, where the War of the Heavens was truly held. So, was it not extremely bizarre that Kongsha had already started preparing for it while he was still on the master-teacher continent? Or could this mean that the Heavens Order granted him the power to foresee the future? As wise and talented as our teacher is, he isn't omniscient. He only came to know all of this because of someone else's guidance, ancient sage Zi Yuan said. Zhongxian nodded silently. Kongsha's accomplishments on the master-teacher continent were simply too spectacular, such that it was hard to believe that someone could actually achieve so much on his own. It was indeed too good to be true. All humans would have to acquire their knowledge from something or someone. Even someone as talented as Kongsha required someone else's guidance for his cultivation. It was just like how, despite having the Library of Heaven's Path, he still needed Kongsha's guidance from time to point the way for him. That technique was imparted to us by our Grand Teacher, ancient sage Zi Yuan added. Grand Teacher? Zhongxian was perplexed. He had not heard of Kongsha having a teacher before. A long time ago on the master-teacher continent, we respectfully addressed those who imparted knowledge to another as Sure, ancient sage Zi Yuan said. It was only after the appearance of our Grand Teacher that we began to address teachers as Larosha. Zhongxian was utterly confused. Why was he unable to understand what ancient sage Zi Yuan was saying? It's similar to how people address you as Zhongshe, how you address our teacher as Kongsha, and how others address me as Yangshe. We usually use one's surname with the character She in order to respectfully address a teacher. The term Larosha is how our teacher initially addressed his teacher, and the rest of us eventually came to use the term as well. The term eventually came to be what it is now, ancient sage Zi Yuan explained. Zhongxian was stunned for a long while before it suddenly struck him. With a doubtful look on his face, he asked, "Do you mean to say that your grandteacher's surname is Laro? It's for that reason that Kongsha addressed him as Larosha, and it eventually came to be the Larosha that we know?" Indeed. Ancient sage Zi Yuan nodded. There's actually someone who goes by the surname of Laro, one? Zhongxian was speechless for a while. Then, with an intrigued look on his face, he asked, "If your grand teacher was able to impart such a formidable technique to Kongsha, he should be quite a formidable individual, right? But why have I never heard of him before?" He was well versed in the history of the master-teacher continent, and he even had Vicious, a relic of the ancient era, with him. Yet, they had never heard of this formidable expert who went by the surname of Laro. According to what our teacher said, our grand teacher was only on the master-teacher continent for a very short period of time before leaving on a green ox. Our teacher doesn't know where he went after that, and neither do we. I see. It seemed like he could only ask Kongsha about it after he came back to life. Sighing deeply, Zhongxian looked at the crowd in front of him and asked, "By the way, do you happen to have any pinnacle god essence pills or other medicinal herbs that I can use to raise my cultivation?" His soul cultivation had already reached conferred God King realm pinnacle, and his physical body and Zhenqi cultivation were lagging behind. He had already figured out a plan for his physical body. With the revival of the Deathless Monarch, he would be able to use the Deathless Lava Reservoir in order to temper his physical body. As for his Zhenqi cultivation, he had already comprehended a God Monarch realm cultivation technique. The only things he was lacking were pills and medicinal herbs to refine his Zhenqi. As long as he had sufficient spiritual energy, he would be able to raise his Zhenqi cultivation to God King realm pinnacle or even push for a breakthrough to God Monarch. However, the problem was that pinnacle god essence pills were incredibly rare. Even an apothecary as skilled as Fu Jiangchen did not have many of them in his possession. So, he was thinking that Kong Shi might have accumulated a stockpile over the years that he could use. Our teacher forged several pinnacle god essence pills back then. We have eaten quite a few of them over the years to raise our cultivation, so I think there should be around a few hundred of them left at the moment. Let me go get them for you, ancient sage Zi Yuan said with a smile before walking out of the room. A few hundred of them? Zhong Xian's lips twitched. As expected of Kong Shi. He sure was wealthy. Not long later, ancient sage Zi Yuan returned with a sack, and he threw it over to Zhong Xian casually. They should all be in there. Zhong Xian opened the sack, and there were indeed many god essence pills in there. All in all, there seemed to be a few hundred of them in there. Do you all really store your god essence pills like that? Zhong Xian's eyebrows twitched a little. Nearly all cultivators in the firmament stored their god essence pills in jade containers or jade bottles in order to protect them, yet ancient sage Zi Yuan and the others actually just tossed them into a gunny sack as if they were trash. Zhong Xian could not help but wonder if the pills inside were authentic. So, he took one out and swallowed it whole. Gu. A burst of spiritual energy immediately gushed into his meridians. Without any hesitation, Zhong Xian popped a second one into his mouth, then a third one. Is that how you eat pills? Ancient sage Zi Yuan's mouth opened agape. They did have quite a lot of pills in their inventory, but they were pinnacle god essence pills. Even as a conferred god king, he would have to take quite a while to assimilate its energy, but the other party simply threw them into his mouth as if he was eating candy. No wonder you are always short on pills. As he watched the young man, speechless, the latter's cultivation began to rise swiftly. God King Realm Intermediate Stage. God King Realm Advanced Stage. In a few moments, his cultivation reached God King Realm Pinnacle before slowly coming to a halt. What a pity. Pinnacle God Essence pills aren't useful for me anymore, Zhong Xian remarked lamentably. Pinnacle God Essence pills were usually effective even for most conferred God Kings, but due to the unique nature of the pathos of heaven, the requirement on the purity of spiritual energy that he absorbed was extremely high. The purity of the Pinnacle God Essence pills only sufficed for him to reach God King Realm Pinnacle. Beyond this point, no matter how many of them he ate, he would not be able to push his cultivation any higher. It's fortunate that they are no longer effective for you, or else you might really have depleted our entire inventory, ancient sage Zi Yuan remarked helplessly. Lowering his head, Zhong Xian noted that the pills in the gunny sack had already dropped by half. Chuckling awkwardly, he scratched his head and said, "Ha ha ha, the pills that Kong Shi forged are simply too delicious. They even come in different fruity flavors, pineapple, apple, grape. I got a little addicted and ended up eating more than I needed to." Ancient sage Zi Yuan. 1. Laro means old. Chapter 2239 The flood of spiritual energy is here. Having come this far with Kong Shi, ancient sage Zi Yuan could be considered a person who had braved many storms. There were very few things in the world that could shake him. But when it came to pinnacle god essence pills, even for them, they would need at least 1 or 2 months to assimilate the massive amount of spiritual energy harnessed within them. Yet, the young man swallowed 100 of them in a single sitting without any rest. Not only was he fine, he even gave some feedback on the taste of the pills. The hell? Was that even the main point? Ancient sage Zi Yuan and the others suddenly did not feel like talking to the young man. That thing inside your body must not a stomach but a black hole. While ancient sage Zi Yuan was still feeling exasperated by the situation, he noticed that the young man was staring at him intently. Other than pinnacle god essence pills, do you have any other pills that taste? I mean, harness purer spiritual energy, such as pill kings or something? If you do, I am willing to buy them from you. I'll make sure to compensate you properly after I successfully become a god monarch. We don't have anything better than that, ancient sage Zi Yuan replied with a shake of his head. His teacher had told them to treat Zhong Xian as their leader, so naturally, the young man had the rights to access their pills. It was just that they had nothing more potent than pinnacle god essence pills with them. Back then, Kongsha would have needed a great amount of spiritual energy in order to make a breakthrough, too. How did he manage to acquire the massive amount of spiritual energy that was required? Zhongxian asked curiously. He could imagine that Kongsha would have been in the same position as he currently was. Relying on just pinnacle god essence pills would only bring his cultivation to God King realm pinnacle. If so, what did Kongsha make use of in order to become a god monarch? He managed to become a god monarch through the flood of spiritual energy, ancient sage Zi Yuan replied. It's a phenomenon that occurs once every decade, and each time, it brings all sorts of treasures into the world along with it. It was in the flood of spiritual energy 40 years ago that we and our teacher grew swiftly to our current levels. Zhongxian widened his eyes in realization. He had long heard of the flood of spiritual energy, but he was unsure about the details surrounding it. But just by looking at the sheer number of conferred god kings and god kings that had died in the previous floods of spiritual energy, it was not too difficult to deduce that there were amazing treasures that one could procure from it. In fact, some of the things were at the level where even god monarchs would lose their rationality over them. Otherwise, they would not have gone to the extent of taking away his direct disciples. That only showed how highly they valued the flood of spiritual energy. How long is there before the next flood of spiritual energy? The phenomenon happens once every decade, but it's impossible to estimate the exact date. Sometimes, it comes a bit late, sometimes, it comes a little early. Going by past estimates, there should be still another half a year before the flood of spiritual energy arrived. However, the earlier world conferment has shaken things up quite a bit, so I would say that there's a good chance that the fifth flood of spiritual energy will be happening very soon, ancient sage Zi Yuan said as he gazed into the sky. The earlier world conferment had caused the spiritual energy all over the firmament to congregate together and linger in the air. Such conditions could easily induce an earlier arrival of the flood of spiritual energy. Zhongxian heaved a sigh of relief upon hearing those words. Since the pinnacle god essence pills were useless to him, it seemed like he would have to wait for the next flood of spiritual energy to try to obtain even more potent medicinal herbs in order to make a breakthrough. For the next 2 days, Zhongxian remained on the mountain, devoting most of his time to looking through Kongsha's book collection. After that, he bade farewell and took his leave. What was lagging behind was his physical body cultivation. Little Chick had told him that he could repair the deathless lava reservoir swiftly once they returned to the sky of spirit origin, so Zhongxian felt that it would be best to get it over and done with. With Little Chick around, there was no need for him to use the Great Displacement teleportation formation. They could just rip through space to go wherever they wanted. A few breaths later, he, Luo Chichi, and Little Chick arrived back in the sky of spirit origin. Your sovereignty, congratulations on your return. Standing right in front of Spirit God Palace were Fire Feather conferred God King and the others. They seemed to have already heard of the news, so they had chosen to stand there in wait for Little Chick's return. Prepare some pills that are rich in spiritual energy for me. I need as many of them as possible, Little Chick said with a wave of his hand. Yes. The Fire Feather conferred God King and the others quickly got to action. 2 hours later, they returned with many invaluable medicinal herbs in hand. There was no way they would dare hold back when they had received a direct order from their god monarch. So, they practically brought every precious medicinal herb that was in their vault over to present to Little Chick. Looking at the incredible array of medicinal herbs before him, Zhongxian was stupefied. He was utterly flabbergasted by just how rich these conferred God King clans were. Even though there were no notable medicinal herbs that could help him advance his cultivation, what they had was more than enough to forge several hundred pinnacle god essence pills. Gathering all the medicinal herbs together, Little Chick led Zhongxian into Spirit God Palace, and soon, they arrived before a pool of lava. As the lava rumbled, an intense heatwave would burst forth. With a wave of Little Chick's hand, the medicinal herbs scattered in the air above the lava pool. They swiftly burst into spiritual energy before surging right into the lava pool. Chio! With the massive influx of spiritual energy, the searing lava swiftly morphed into a magnificent phoenix of massive proportions, towering over the entire pool. Little Chick slit his finger and dripped a few droplets of his blood essence into the lava pool. Xiong xiong! The phoenix grew even larger as a result of the infusion of the blood essence. Not only so, it began to emanate the unique aura of a god monarch, creating great pressure on those that stood in the vicinity. Young master, I have finished preparing the deathless lava reservoir. You can enter now, little chick said with a smile. Without any hesitation, Zhongxian quickly walked into the lava pool. Tzzzzzz. As soon as he entered the lava pool, he could sense concentrated energy streaming into his body through his acupoints, flowing through his meridians and revitalizing his body. Zhongxian quickly sat down in the middle of the pool and focused his attention on absorbing the energy. Just like that, his physical body grew at a rapid pace. God King Realm Primary Stage. God King Realm Intermediate Stage. God King Realm Advanced Stage. Conferred God King Realm Pinnacle. 4 hours later, the energy within the lava pool finally receded. At the same time, Zhongxian also concluded his cultivation. In terms of the sheer strength of my physical body, I am already comparable to a conferred God King Realm Pinnacle cultivator, Zhongxian muttered with gleaming eyes. His physical body had made great advancements within the past 4 hours, advancing all the way from God King Realm Primary Stage to conferred God King Realm Pinnacle. Using just his physical body, he was already able to put up a fight against conferred God King Realm Pinnacle cultivators and easily triumph over them. And his strongest trump card at the moment was still not his physical body but his soul cultivation. As a conferred king of the 9 skies, looking at it just in terms of soul cultivation, even 9 conferred god kings of the same tier would not be able to withstand his might. After he was done cultivating, he released his clone to allow him to cultivate as well. Soon enough, the latter's cultivation reached conferred God King Realm Pinnacle, too. As for Vicious, due to his slow rate of cultivation, it was unlikely that he would be able to grow too quickly. So, Zhongxian kept him sealed within the Book of Heaven's path. With this, his cultivation had finally reached its bottleneck. Until the flood of spiritual energy arrived, it was unlikely that he would be able to raise his Junshi cultivation any further. So, he decided to focus his attention on creating his sword art. But the next moment, Little Chick suddenly appeared before him and said, "Young master, the Cloud Dragon Monarch has invited the other 8 god monarchs to head to the Flooding Sea." Flooding Sea? Yes. It's the area where the flood of spiritual energy originates. Even though the phenomenon will swiftly encompass the entire firmament, the most valuable of items will only be found within the Flooding Sea. Little Chick said. Is the flood of spiritual energy going to happen soon? Zhongxian asked. Based on the new estimates, it will likely occur within the next 2 days. Little Chick nodded. That's why the Cloud Dragon Monarch invited the other god monarchs over in order to make preparations for it. Let's go then, Zhongxian said as he rose to his feet. The flood of spiritual energy was finally happening. Perhaps he could make use of this opportunity to raise his cultivation to conferred God King or even God Monarch. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.